the silent day of a world, welcome back to the Arcane Narratives. This is where the stories of the grimdark galaxy are told. Not with haste, not with sensationalism, only warm narration that allows you to truly immerse yourself, or simply to sleep soundly amidst the cosmic darkness. Today, we embark on a long journey concerning a species that has no name other than its own hunger, the Tyranids. If you feel there are any points in the lore that are inaccurate, or if you wish to share your thoughts on the Warhammer 40K universe, please leave a comment below. This channel is always listening and improving with the community. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. And now, let me take you to a world that no longer has a name. There are planets the galaxy remembers for their heroic deeds, for their grand cathedrals, for the mineral veins that feed entire sectors. There are worlds whose names are carved into marble, chanted in the litanies of missionaries, and boldly printed on the planetary maps of the administratum. And then there are places, countless places, that exist only as numbers in tax ledgers, as pale blue dots on a navigation screen. Worlds whose only remarkable feature is this: they are still alive, still paying their tithes, still sending their sons to the guard, still sowing and praying faithfully every evening. This world, the world we are about to witness, was one of them. No hero's name was born here. No cleric chose this place as a pilgrimage stop. Only plains covered in golden wheat under 3 small suns, hive cities of stark grey ferrocrete, and orbital radar stations hanging like silver pebbles around a faint magnetic ring. Population, 3,200,000,000 souls, most of them farm labourers, deep miners, technicians maintaining the transcontinental rail lines, people who kept the machines running and the grain arriving on schedule. They lived, they aged, they died. Their children grew up and did the same things. That was the destiny of a third-rate agri-world located in the outermost rim of Segmentum Tempestus, so far away that even the light of terror arrived centuries late. Life here was never rushed. Mornings began with the tolling of local church bells, small cathedrals of grey granite, low domes, hand-carved, simple imperial aquila symbols. Farmers woke before dawn, tilled the soil, sowed the seeds, watered with irrigation systems dating back to the Great Crusade, old but still running well. Freight trains, long as iron snakes, snaked through the valleys. They carried wheat to the central depots where mechanical cranes loaded the sacks onto orbital shuttles, which then transferred them to transports that would jump into the warp to deliver the 10% tithe to the Imperium. The remaining 80% fed the world itself. The final 10% was stored deep underground, in reserve for bad harvest years. Bad years that had not come in the last 2 centuries. At night, the cities lit up, not the warm glow of prosperous worlds, but the cold, blue-white glare of old fluorescent bulbs cast over wide, empty streets. The concrete high-rises, built purely for function, without ornamentation or superfluous windows, housed tens of thousands of families. Each apartment was 20 square meters, enough for sleeping, cooking, and worshipping at a small, 2-headed eagle shrine. Children played in common yards fenced with rusted chain link. The elderly sat on concrete benches, looking down at the streets where noisy diesel trucks rattled by, carrying night shift workers to the canning factories. Factories where machines ground, crushed, welded, and packaged, non-stop, under the steady, unblinking blue-white light. There was nothing special about this world, and that was precisely why it had survived for so long. The orbital radar stations, 6 of them, evenly spaced on the geostationary belt, scanned space hourly. They recorded signals, categorized them, and reported back to the ground command center. Most of what they picked up was background noise, microwave radiation from nearby stars, the faint drone of mining vessels in the neighboring system, occasionally a reflected signal from transports passing the system's border. The watch officers, mostly middle-aged men who had served 20 years in the local PDF before being promoted to orbital surveillance, sat before the pale blue screens, drinking recycled coffee, reading old books, and marking their logs. No suspicious contact. They logged that phrase every hour. They logged it every day. They logged it for 23 uninterrupted years. Until one night, it was not a night of anything notable on the ground. The citizens were still working, still eating dinner, still going to bed on time. The wheat fields still rustled under the warm night breeze. The factories still hummed steadily. Children still slept soundly in cribs against thin concrete walls. But in orbit, a watch officer whose name no one remembers, a 54-year-old man, grey-bearded, once awarded a long service medal but never wore it, looked at his screen and saw something was wrong. It wasn't a signal. Rather, it was the absence of a signal. A void, a pocket of silence amidst the background noise of the universe. He frowned, twisted the frequency dial, checked the antennae. No error. The system was functioning normally, but on the screen there was an area, an oval region about 3 astronomical units wide, an area where every signal seemed to be absorbed. No reflection, no scattering, only nothingness. He jotted a note in the log, abnormal phenomenon, recheck in 2 hours. Then took a sip of coffee and returned to his old book on the history of battles on distant worlds. Battles he had never witnessed and never would. 2 hours later, the void was larger. Significantly larger. As if something was moving, no, not moving, but spreading, like a drop of ink in water, silently, without haste. He contacted the adjacent station. They confirmed they saw it too. Not just one station. All 6 stations began to log the same phenomenon. An invisible darkness, not attached to matter, emitting no heat, no signal, simply a widening blank space on the wavescan maps. The radar team commander, a 59-year-old woman named Sarana Kolth, with 2 sons studying engineering in the central city, was awakened at midnight. She looked at the reports, frowned, and called the ground PDF headquarters. They told her they would check. They told her not to raise the alarm. They said it might just be interference from a solar flare from one of the system's 3 stars. They said they would monitor it further. Kolth nodded, hung up, and sat back before the screen, looking at that pale blue screen where the dark void was growing by the minute. A strange thought occurred to her. This was the first time in her 23 years of service that she felt fear. And strangely, the fear was not loud. It did not scream. It did not shake. It was simply a silence so profound that she could hear her own heart beating. Beneath the surface, those with the ability to sense the warp began to wake. They were not many. A planet like this had no official sanctioned psychers, no professional astropath teams. Only a few sensitive souls, loosely monitored by the local ecclesiarchy. People who could hear the distant whispers of the warp, but were not strong enough to be a danger. They were old preachers, children haunted by nightmares, miners who sometimes saw shapes no one else saw. They lived quietly, kept their secrets, and prayed to the Emperor to protect them from their own souls. That night, they woke up with the same feeling, emptiness. Not the emptiness of sleep, not the emptiness of loneliness. It was an emptiness that had weight, shape, and intent, as if the warp, which always rustled with distant whispers, always shimmered with the lights of emotion, always rippled like a dark sea, had suddenly gone silent, as if a thick curtain had been drawn over the surface of the water, as if something was listening. An old preacher named Erasmus, kneeling in his small chapel in the suburban village, raised his hand to draw the Aquila sign, but his hand trembled and failed. He tried to pray, the same litanies he had known by heart for 60 years, but the words would not leave his lips. They lay still in his throat, like pebbles. He tried to reach the light of the Emperor, the light he always felt like a distant candle in his mind, but there was nothing. No light, no warmth, only a quiet, vast darkness, cold as the space between the stars. He whispered, "Emperor, Emperor protect." But even the whisper did not echo in his mind anymore. It dissolved, as if something had swallowed the prayer itself. A 12-year-old boy, asleep in his apartment on the 17th floor of the eastern Hive block, jolted upright with a choked cry. His mother ran in, held him, and asked, "What's wrong?" The boy did not answer. He only trembled and whispered, "Something is coming. Something is hungry." His mother stroked his head, told him it was just a nightmare, then put him back to bed and turned off the light. But the boy could not sleep again. He lay, looking at the ceiling, feeling an invisible pressure gathering outside the atmosphere, like a giant storm with no thunder, no wind, only a strange gravity pressing down on his heart. That was the shadow in the warp, a phenomenon that had no name in human language at the time. People would name it later, after too many worlds disappeared following the same pattern. But that night, it was just a feeling. The feeling of being disconnected, isolated, trapped in a sealed box with no way out. The warp was still there, but between the warp and this world, there was a thick membrane, a living membrane, a colossal and alien will. It was covering the entire star system like an invisible, clenching hand. The few astropaths on distant trade routes, those responsible for interplanetary communications, tried to send a distress signal. They burned incense, concentrated, released their consciousness into the warp current to seek kindred souls on neighboring worlds. But nothing answered. Their signals vanished into the silence. One of them, a young man named Kalor, tried to push harder, burning his entire spirit to punch through that membrane. He saw something, just for a flash. A colossal biological mass. No, not a mass, but countless masses, connected by strands of thought like spiderwebs, spreading through space like a single gigantic living body with no fixed shape. And within it, he felt one thing: hunger. A hunger not of an individual, but of an infinite will. A will with no emotion, no malice, only one singular need: to consume, to metabolize, to grow. Kalor screamed, then passed out. When he woke up, his eyes were pure white. He never spoke again. The next day, the sun rose as usual. The system's 3 small suns crested the horizon, casting a pale yellow light over the wheat fields. The citizens woke up. They knew nothing of what had happened in orbit. They knew nothing of the shadow in the warp. They knew nothing of the unanswered prayers. They only knew that today was sowing day and the work would not do itself. But there were small signs. Signs that one only notices when it is already too late. The orbital radar stations reported the dark void was no longer a void. It had become something. Mass sensors recorded colossal objects moving into the system. Objects that emitted no identification signal, had no plasma engines, showed no metallic signatures. They were simply present, like mountains of flesh and bone suspended in space, drifting slowly but relentlessly along a converging trajectory. What were they called? Ships? Organisms? Or simply fragments of something larger, a giant body that had fragmented itself to traverse the darkness between the stars? The planet's defense fleet, 3 old cruisers, 6 patrol frigates, and an orbital defense cluster of 24 laser platforms, was activated. Mobilization orders were sent down. The ground PDF began to muster. There was no panic, not yet, only orders, checklists, and clear instructions written centuries ago in tactical manuals. Officers read them, nodded, and began to move troops. And then the first things fell from the sky. Not missiles, not bombs. They were biological capsules, spheres the size of a house, their shell hard as chitin but warm as living skin. They fell without thunder, without fire, only a small hiss of air being torn apart. They crashed into the suburban forests, onto distant wheat fields, into clear lakes, into abandoned mining areas. When they hit the ground, they did not explode. They cracked open, and from inside, smaller things crawled out. Insect-like creatures the size of dogs, with dark grey chitinous shells. 6 legs, or 8 legs, or an uncountable number of legs. Jaws that bit into the soil, the grass, the trees, into every organic thing, and began to eat. Not eating to survive. It was eating that was systematic, planned. They ate and they dug. They ate and they secreted. What they secreted was not waste, it was a foundation. A semi-solid, semi-liquid biomass clinging to the ground, spreading like mold, quickly germinating into new structures. Biological conduits, towers sprouting like bamboo, membranes stretched between trees like spiderwebs. Within a few hours, a forest became something else. No longer a forest, no longer soil, but a new ecosystem, the ecosystem of the Tyranids. Nearby inhabitants reported. They spoke of strange creatures. They said the trees were dying. They said the air had a strange smell, a sweet smell mixed with metal. The PDF was dispatched. They arrived, they looked, and they did not understand. They saw biological tubes drawing water from the river. They saw 10-meter-tall chitin towers, their tops like mouths spitting out shimmering clouds of spores. They saw small creatures butchering a deer carcass, not eating the meat, but putting it into a biological pouch. The pouch contracted, digested, and secreted a thick, nutritious pulp that was transferred into a conduit. A young lieutenant, a 27-year-old man who had graduated from the military academy 6 months prior, looked through his binoculars at the forest and whispered, "Are they farming?" No one answered, because no one knew the answer. They just stood there, staring at something that had no name in their experience, and felt a chill creep up from their hearts to the backs of their necks. The next stage began. The cloud of spores began to spread. They didn't fly fast. They didn't need to. They simply drifted with the wind, small particles like dust, sparkling under the sun like silver snow. Initially, people thought they were harmless. They fell onto roofs, onto streets, onto fields. Children reached out to catch them, laughing as they dissolved on their warm palms. Older people inhaled them, coughed, and returned to work. But within days, everything began to change. The wheat fields near the infected forest began to yellow. Not the yellow of ripeness, but the yellow of disease. Leaves dried, stems softened, roots rotted. Farmers dug up the soil and found thin white filaments, like hair, spreading everywhere, clinging to the wheat roots like parasites. They tried to cut them. The white filaments twitched, then secreted an acidic fluid that burned the skin. They reported to the authorities. The authorities sent agricultural technicians. The technicians took samples back to the lab, looked under the microscope, and saw cells unlike any recorded organism. Cells with multiple nuclei, flexible membranes, and an astonishing ability to self-replicate. One cell divided into two, two into four, four into 16, all within a few hours. "This is not fungus," the technician said. "This is something else." But his report was buried in the files, because there were too many other reports. Reports of strange creatures seen in the forests, reports of missing livestock, reports of suburban villages losing contact, reports of power lines cut, reports of water pumping stations ceasing to function. Each report, in isolation, was not alarming, but piece them together and one saw a picture. The planet was being taken apart, piece by piece. The PDF began to react. They sent patrol teams to the infected zones. They carried laser rifles, flamers, and clear orders. Destroy every strange biological structure. The teams entered the forests. Some returned, some did not. Those who returned told stories no one wanted to believe. Human-sized creatures with chitin armor hard as steel, moving fast as shadows, attacking from the trees, from underground, from every direction at once. They said the creatures were not afraid of bullets. They said even when hit, they rushed forward faster the closer they got, as if they knew no pain. They spoke of larger creatures, 3-meter-tall beasts, 4 legs, 2 long-clawed arms, and a head with no eyes, but seemed to see everything. They said that when those large creatures appeared, the smaller ones became smarter, more coordinated, as if an invisible voice was commanding them. That was the first time the people on this planet touched the concept of synapse. They didn't have a name for it. They only knew that, when those large creatures were alive, the entire swarm moved as a single body. And when they died, if they died, the smaller creatures scattered, panicked, and were easier to kill. But killing them was not easy, and they did not stop coming. By the 3rd week after the first capsules fell, the situation was out of control. Not because of one major battle, not because of a massive assault, but because the planet was dissolving from within, piece by piece, too slow to cause panic, yet fast enough to be unstoppable. The orbital radar stations reported more objects were falling from space. No longer spore capsules, but larger, heavier creatures wrapped in thick biological shells. They fell like meteorites, leaving short trails of fire, and when they hit the ground, they crawled out. Giant creatures, tall as 3-story buildings, with thick chitin armor, legs like columns, and jaws large enough to crush an armored vehicle. People would later call them carnifex, but that night they just called them monsters, and there were no weapons in the PDF arsenal strong enough to stop them. A carnifex walked through a village. It didn't attack, it didn't destroy, it simply walked through, slow, deliberate steps, crushing everything underfoot. Houses, roads, people. Survivors recounted that it didn't even look at them. It just walked straight ahead, following a predetermined direction, as if obeying an invisible map. It reached a river, stopped, and stood still. Then from its back, biological tubes grew out, plunged into the water, and began to suck. The river water level visibly dropped within hours. Fish died. Shoreline trees withered. And the carnifex stood there, sucking without pause, until not a drop of water remained. Then it turned and walked away, leaving a dead river behind. The PDF tried to resist. They established defensive lines around the major cities. They dug trenches, erected barbed wire, laid mines, set up laser grids, prepared artillery, and called for air support. Air support arrived, 6 aging bomber planes, each carrying 2 500-kilogram bombs. They flew over the infected forests and dropped their payload. The bombs exploded. Fire erupted. The forest burned. But when the smoke cleared, they saw that the fire had only scorched the surface. Beneath, the biological structures remained intact. They had protected themselves with a thick membrane secreting fire-retardant fluid. And from the ashes, new creatures sprouted faster, larger, more adapted. That was when humanity began to understand. They were not just attacking, they were transforming the planet. Month 2. The major cities still stood, but they were isolated. Roads were cut, rail lines were destroyed, bridges collapsed. Flights were attacked by swarms of flying creatures, dark grey winged bioforms, small as falcons but flying in flocks of thousands, diving into plane engines, clogging air intakes, causing engine fires. Planes crashed, pilots parachuted out. Some survived impact, some did not. The survivors tried to walk back to the city but never arrived. They vanished into the forests that were no longer forests. Food began to run low. The suburban fields were lost. City reserves were enough for 3 months, but 3 months only if no refugees poured in from the countryside. And refugees did pour in. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They arrived with carts, with luggage on their backs, with crying children, with stories of villages wiped out, of families disappearing, of creatures that came in the night without a sound and left behind only bloodstains. The city gates were opened. They had to be. But when the gates opened, the city became overcrowded. Not enough food, not enough clean water, not enough hospital beds. Disease began to spread. Illnesses no one knew the name of. High fevers, skin boils, coughing up blood. Doctors couldn't find the cause. Medicine didn't work. The death toll rose daily. And then strangers appeared. They were refugees, but different. They were not afraid like the others. They moved in organized groups, and they spoke of salvation. They said the creatures were not enemies. They were messengers. They were the future. They were the only way to survive. They said if humanity accepted them, humanity would be protected, would be evolved, would become part of something greater. They were the Genestealer Cult, but no one knew that. People only saw them as religious zealots, something not uncommon on imperial worlds. The Arbites arrested a few, interrogated, executed, but there were too many. And they hid in the crowds, in the shadows, in the underground bunkers, and they continued to spread their whispers. Some people listened, the desperate ones, those who had lost everything, those who had nothing left to believe in but the promise of a different future. They followed the strangers. They disappeared into the forbidden zones. And when they returned, if they returned, something had changed in their eyes. Month 3. The orbital defense fleet was lost. Not in one heroic battle. They fought, but they lost. The spaceborne Tyranid organisms, gigantic living ships with no engines but capable of movement via organic plasma propulsion, surrounded the cruisers one by one. They fired streams of biological acid that corroded the metal hull. They released swarms of smaller creatures that rushed into the cracks, ate through the corridors, and attacked the crew. The ships resisted to the last breath, but it wasn't enough. One exploded. 2 were captured and dragged into the belly of the colossal organisms, where they were digested. Not just the metal, but the people, the data in the computers, the memories in the heads of the dead. On the ground, people looked up at the night sky and no longer saw the familiar stars. They only saw gigantic black shadows drifting past, obscuring the light like living clouds. And from those shadows, day and night, new things fell. Not just spores, not just fighting creatures, but larger structures. Biological towers as tall as skyscrapers plunging into the ground, their roots spreading deep into the sediment layer, beginning to suck up not just water, not just nutrients, but minerals, metals, everything that could be converted into biomass. The final cities began to collapse, not due to direct attack, but because their foundations were giving way. The ground beneath the cities became soft, hollow, like a sponge. Buildings tilted, streets cracked. The sewage system overflowed with a strange green viscous fluid, sickeningly sweet-smelling. People didn't dare to drink tap water. They filtered, boiled, prayed, but still some fell ill. And the sick did not die, they transformed. Their skin developed hard patches, their fingernails grew long, their teeth became sharper. They began to crave something that was not human food. And then they disappeared. They went down into the underground bunkers, into the darkness, and no one dared to look for them. Month 4, the final evacuation order was given. What was left of the planetary government, an old, weak governor, some high-ranking PDF officers, a few ecclesiarchy priests, decided this planet could not be held. They needed to leave. They needed to send a distress signal to neighboring worlds, to the Imperium, to anyone who could hear. But no astropaths were alive. There was no way to send a signal through the warp. They could only use the remaining old transport ships, 3 of them, enough to carry 10,000 people, and try to run out of the system, hoping to reach another world before fuel ran out. A list was made. The essential people, high-ranking officials, engineers, doctors, teachers, children. The rest, the majority, would stay behind. No one said it, but everyone knew. Staying meant death. The night before the ships lifted off, a crowd gathered outside the launch pad. Tens of thousands of people, carrying bags, carrying hope. They didn't cause trouble. They just stood there, looking at the large ships and waiting for a miracle. The PDF stood between the crowd and the ships, holding their rifles, not looking anyone in the eye. Some soldiers cried, some prayed, some just closed their eyes and tried not to think. The ships lifted off at dawn, 3 of them, leaving the ground with the roar of old engines. The citizens watched, hands raised to draw the Aquila sign, lips whispering prayers no one could hear. The ships flew high, piercing the atmosphere, turning into small points of light, then disappearing into a sky filled with gigantic shadows. 2 of the 3 ships never left orbit. They were attacked by flying creatures, hit by biological acid streams that pierced their engines. Then they exploded into orange fireballs. The 3rd ship escaped, but no one knew where it went, and no one ever heard news from it again. Month 5. The planet had no name, no government, no communication, only scattered pockets of population, hiding in deep bunkers, in old mining tunnels, in abandoned shipwrecks. They lived day by day, eating what was left in reserves, drinking water filtered through cloth, and hoping that no sound of chitinous footsteps echoed outside. But the footsteps always came, not fast, not slow, just steady, like a machine, like a single will. The Tyranid swarm no longer needed to actively destroy the humans. They just needed to wait. Wait for the people to die from hunger, from thirst, from sickness. And when they died, the small creatures would come, drag their bodies out, and bring them to the gigantic digestive pools that had been built all over the planet. Those pools, those green, thick, bubbling biological acid pools, miles wide, digested everything. Flesh, bone, clothing, metal, plastic, everything became nutrition. And the nutrition was pumped up the biological towers, transferred to the ships in orbit, stored, processed, prepared for what was to come. People knew nothing of what was happening in orbit. They did not know that inside those colossal living ships, the Norn-Queens were working non-stop. Gigantic, flesh-mountain creatures, lying in humid chambers, giving birth to millions of new creatures from the collected biomass. They did not know that every creature born was adjusted, optimized, adapted to the specific environment of this planet. They did not know that the entire process of consuming the planet was a calculated, efficient cycle, wasting not a single gram of biomass. They only knew one thing: the world was dying, and so were they. Month 6. No one counted the days anymore. The final survivors, perhaps a few hundred, perhaps a few thousand, no one was sure, hid in the deepest bunkers, places where light never reached, where the air was heavy with mold and rust-stained water. They didn't talk much. They had nothing left to say. They just sat in the dark, listening to the dripping water, and sometimes, very far away, the sound of things digging outside. And then one day, no one knew which day, the digging stopped. Silence. A silence that lasted for hours, for days. People dared to step out, dared to climb up, dared to open the bunker doors. They saw the sky. But it was no longer the sky they remembered. No clouds, no sunlight, only a uniform grey colour, as if the sky had become a silver cloth. They looked down at the ground. No trees, no grass, no soil. Only a flat, dark, grey surface, smooth as glass, stretching to the horizon. No sound, no wind, no insects, no birds, nothing alive. They returned to the bunker, closed the door, and never came out again. A week later, they died of starvation. From space, the planet looked like a grey sphere, smooth, without a trace of sea, forest, mountains, or cities. Only a homogeneous surface, as if the entire planet had been ground up, digested, and reformed into a single colossal nutrient mass. The Tyranid ships, the gigantic space organisms, descended one by one. They landed on the surface, opened biological mouths as wide as canyons, and began to suck. Sucking not just the surface layer, but deep, sucking to the core, sucking the planet's crust itself. Rock and soil melted into a mineral soup, pumped up, filtered and stored. The process lasted for months. But finally, when the ships left orbit, the planet was no longer a planet. It was just a small, barren, cold rock. No atmosphere, no magnetic field, nothing left to exploit, a planet corpse. The Tyranid fleet regrouped. They did not rush to leave. They lay dormant in high orbit, digesting biomass, giving birth to the new generation, adjusting genes, preparing for the next planet. And then, when all was complete, they turned away, disappearing into the darkness between the stars. Without haste, without looking back, as if this planet had never existed. Years later, an Imperial scout ship passed through the system. They scanned, recorded, and found a nameless dead planet. They did not land. They simply updated the map, a grey dot with the note, no exploitable value, no sign of life, cause undetermined, and they flew away. That planet no longer had a name on the Imperial map. It had only a numerical designation, a designation no one remembered, no one cared, because there were too many planets like that, too many worlds disappearing in silence. Too many places that once held 3 billion souls, once had wheat fields, once had church bells, once had children playing under the sun, and were now just a void. That is how the Tyranids eat. Not with hatred, not with fire, not with malice. They eat with patience, with system, with the unwavering will of a hunger that can learn, a hunger that is never full, a hunger moving through the galaxy like an invisible beast, leaving planet corpses as its footprints. And the question no one dares to ask, the question that lies silently in the minds of those who look at the galactic map and see more and more grey dots appearing, is, can a hunger that can learn, adapt, and never stop have anything to negotiate with other than our own existence? The Great Devourer. There are many deadly threats the Imperium of Mankind can name and meticulously catalogue. They know chaos, the ruinous perversion of both soul and reason. They understand the primal green tide of the orcs, whose sole purpose is the endless, joyous violence of war. They recognize the mournful, fading empires of the Eldar, now but sad echoes of their former glory. And they track the youthful, ambitious reach of the Tau species. Each of these formidable foes has a rich history, a complex motive, and a compelling reason for its actions that humanity, even if they must destroy it utterly, can still, in some way, comprehend. But there is one chilling enemy against which all known language utterly fails. One threat that exists with no purpose beyond its own silent existence. It has no past to remember, no future to dream of, only the eternal present of a singular driving need to consume, to metabolize, to grow, and to consume again. The Imperium calls it the Great Devourer. Yet that name is merely humanity's crude attempt to frame something that exists beyond all conventional frameworks. The Tyranids care nothing for names, titles, or whether humanity fears or understands them. They concern themselves only with one existential question: is this biomass? And the terrible answer for every single thing in the galaxy is always yes. The Great Devourer is not a single living creature. It is not an organized army. It is certainly not a conventional galactic empire. It is, instead, a biological will, a collective consciousness so vast and so absolute that all boundaries between the individual and the whole, between instinct and strategy, are utterly dissolved. This is the truth that the scholars of the Imperium, the Magos Biologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos spent centuries piecing together into a blurry image. The Tyranids are not merely separate creatures that form a swarm. They are a single swarm that has fragmented itself into countless biological forms to perform one unified, singular function. That is why when one slays a single gaunt, it expresses no fear. It shows no anger. It is simply a lost cell from a colossal living body, and that body possesses millions, indeed billions, of other cells ready to take its place. That is why, when a massive hive ship is destroyed, the hive fleet expresses no sorrow. It simply adjusts, adapts, and continues its relentless advance. Within the perception of the hive mind, the terrifying gestalt consciousness that controls the entire species, the concept of individual does not exist. There are no heroes, no names, no concept of self. There is only us. And that us, a single consciousness so vast it spans across hive fleets, stretching over thousands of light years, is perpetually hungry. The hive mind is a psychic phenomenon for which human terminology remains inadequate. The rare psychers who survive touching its edges recount its presence not as a coherent voice or a rational thought, but as a colossal hunger-given form. It possesses no emotions, no ambition, no pride, and absolutely no fear. It does not question its own purpose. It knows only consumption. Every decision, every tactic, and every bioform produced serves this unique goal. There is no doubt, only continuous, cold, and tireless adjustment. The Hive Mind commands and its terrifying orders flow through a psychic connection that the Imperium of Mankind names synapse. This is not a man-made technology or a simple radio signal. It is a biological psychic connection, an invisible thread linking the central will to every organism on the ground. However, this powerful current cannot flow directly to every single organism. It requires intermediate nodes, creatures strong enough and biologically complex enough to receive the hive mind's colossal orders and efficiently transmit them to the simpler organisms around them. These are the synapse creatures, the living nerve centers of the swarm. The hive tyrant, a towering commander on the battlefield, is one of the strongest synapse nodes. They do not just fight, they control. When a hive tyrant enters the fray, the entire swarm within hundreds of meters feels its presence like a sudden, warm certainty in the surrounding darkness. They move more synchronously, they attack more cohesively, transformed from a chaotic horde of insects into a strategic, disciplined army. The Tyranid warriors, medium-sized armored creatures, form the very backbone of this synapse. They move amongst the smaller units, maintaining the psychic network continuously, ensuring no gaps appear in the chain of command. When these warriors fall, the smaller gaunts and hormogaunts around them immediately falter, not because they are afraid, but because they have suddenly lost their guiding voice. They revert instantly to pure animalistic instinct. Other specialized synapse creatures exist. Zoanthropes, floating psycho-organisms with disproportionately large heads, are purely psychic synapse nodes. They do not fight with tooth and claw, but with the raw power of the warp, unleashing telekinetic energy sufficient to melt a battle tank or shatter the bones of an Astartes inside his powered armor. More critically, they act as powerful amplifiers for the hive mind, projecting the synapse signal further and stronger. Furthermore, the broodlords, the silent leaders of the Genestealer Cults, also project a form of synapse. They do not control the warrior swarm, but they influence the minds of infected humans, the hybrids living secretly within society, acting as a crucial bridge between the hive mind and the traitors within. When all these synapse creatures are alive, the Tyranid swarm operates as a single devastating body. But if one cuts the synapse, if one destroys enough synapse creatures in a given area, the swarm collapses. Not because the creatures die, but because they lose direction, reverting to uncoordinated, wild instincts. This is the single, crucial weakness humanity can hope to exploit. But the synapse is only half of the story. To truly understand the Tyranids, one must comprehend the shadow in the warp. That is the pervasive psychic phenomenon that renders astropaths mute, blinds navigators, drives psychers to madness, and renders the Imperium's entire system of faster-than-light communication useless whenever a hive fleet is close. The shadow in the warp is not an attack. It is not a weapon. It is simply the inevitable consequence of the hive mind's colossal presence. Imagine the warp as an ocean of psychic energy. When the hive mind appears, it does not swim in that ocean. It presses down upon it. Like a colossal boulder dropped into water, it pushes everything around it away, creating a zone of immense psychic pressure that prevents smaller souls from transmitting, from breathing, and from crying out for rescue. This is precisely why Imperial worlds within the Shadow's chilling embrace instantly lose contact. Astropaths, attempting to transmit a message, feel as though they are shouting into a room filled with heavy, sound-dampening cotton. Their voices do not carry. They are instantly swallowed by the void. Navigators looking into the warp see nothing. Not the darkness of chaos, but a uniform, empty grey, as if the warp has been momentarily wiped clean. And the psychers, those most sensitive to the psychic currents, feel the shadow in the warp most acutely, and it often kills them instantly. The shadow is the ultimate isolating factor. It spreads out from the hive ships, which act as massive psychic amplifiers stretching across hundreds of light years. That is why the Tyranids always attack without warning. By the time you can see them clearly, the shadow has already fallen, and all means of calling for reinforcements are already silenced. When the Hive fleet has arrived, the terrifying consumption cycle inevitably begins. The first phase is invasion and predation. Vanguards like lictors and genestealers are dropped, not to conquer, but to cause chaos, attrition, and to gather intelligence. During this time, the shadow in the warp thickens, utterly eliminating hope of rescue. The second phase is consumption. The full force of the swarm descends to establish massive capillary towers, biological spires that root deep into the ground to draw water and minerals. Around them, reclamation pools, giant vats of biological acid, are formed. Every corpse, every tree, and every creature is dissolved into a thick, nutrient-rich green soup. This nutrient is pumped up the capillary towers to the hive ships in orbit. The planet begins to die, not by destruction, but by being eaten. The third phase is assimilation. When all surface biomass is collected, the Tyranids do not stop. They deploy massive boring creatures to drill into the planetary crust. The hive ships descend, opening colossal biological mouths to suck up entire oceans and the atmosphere. The planet becomes a cold, airless, dead rock, its crust scraped clean of all life and material. The hive fleet then departs, heavier, stronger, and prepared for its next meal. The result is always the same. Because the Tyranids do not attack to conquer the galaxy, they attack purely to eat. But for this cycle to operate, the swarm needs a ceaseless supply of new organisms. It needs a biological production machine that works faster than any Mechanicus factory, more versatile than any human assembly line. And that biological machine has a name: Norn-Queens. The Norn-Queens are the reproductive hearts of every hive fleet. They reside in the deepest, most humid chambers of the hive ships, immovable, colossal organisms that are mountains of flesh and membranes. They do not fight. Their sole function is creation. As a hive fleet consumes a world, all the biomass and, crucially, all the genetic material collected is channeled to the Norn-Queens. These colossal entities devour the biomass, analyzing the genes of every creature consumed, from humans to animals to plants, and storing that information in a gigantic genetic library. From this library, they instantly design new creatures. If the swarm needs a creature to withstand extreme heat, the Norn-Queen takes heat-resistant genes from a desert reptile consumed on a previous planet, combines it with the gene for thick, chitinous armor from an insect, and births a new Tyranid variant, perfectly optimized for the next environment. If it needs a new bioweapon to counter Space Marine power armor, the Norn-Queen analyzes the fragments retrieved from the battlefield, finds the structural weaknesses, and designs a new acid, a new claw shape, or a new ranged weapon to penetrate it more effectively. This is not evolution in the conventional Darwinian sense. This is purposeful design. Every Norn-Queen is a living genetic engineer, and every Tyranid organism is a product that is instantly optimized for a specific task. There is no waste, no redundancy. Every claw, every tooth, every layer of armor has a reason for its existence. And if that reason ceases to be valid, the feature is immediately discarded in the next generation. This is why no two Hive fleets are truly alike. Each fleet has passed through different worlds, consumed different biomass, and learned different lessons. Behemoth, the first fleet to clash with the Imperium, employed direct, overwhelming, frontal assaults. Kraken, the subsequent fleet, learned that speed was paramount, producing faster organisms and more flexible flanking tactics. Leviathan, the largest recorded fleet, combines both quantity and speed, alongside an astonishing instantaneous adaptability on the battlefield. Each fleet is a nervous branch of the same colossal hive mind, and that is what makes the Tyranids the gravest threat the Imperium has ever faced. Not because they are the strongest or the most numerous, but because they learn. Every time humanity achieves a victory, the Tyranids take note. Every effective weapon, every successful tactic becomes precious data. And that data is fed to the Norn-Queens, analysed, recombined, and the next generation will always possess the perfect biological answer. There are no permanent victories against the Tyranids, only mere delays. The frantic hope that you can kill them fast enough that they do not have time to learn the lesson. But they always have time to learn, because the hive mind does not sleep, it does not forget, it is only hungry, and that primal hunger has a terrible, eternal memory. Can a hunger that can learn, adapt, and never stop ever be sated? Or are we merely an unfinished meal in a cosmic, never-ending famine? Origin in the darkness. There are profound questions for which the Imperium of Mankind has no answer. This is not always due to a lack of knowledge, though knowledge is perpetually scarce in this dark age. Rather, the answers lie far beyond the reach of any astronomical lens, outside the scope of any computation, and entirely beyond the confines of the galaxy itself. One such question, a terrifying mystery that the Magos Biologists, the Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos, and the scholars of the Administratum have spent centuries pursuing, is simply this. Where do the Tyranids truly come from? The answer is not a location within the galaxy, not a specific planet, star system, or nebula that human beings have ever surveyed. They originate from out there, beyond the stellar halo, past the galactic rim, outside the vast emptiness between galaxies, a realm where light takes millions of years to cross, and where the word distance loses all meaning. The Tyranids are extragalactic organisms, invaders from beyond the dark curtain between star clusters, having traversed a cold void that is worse than death itself, silently like an ancient curse, to arrive here with one singular purpose: to consume. This is the terrifying truth that the Imperium took millennia to accept, for accepting it simultaneously meant accepting a far more dreadful conclusion. If the Tyranids originate from outside this galaxy, then somewhere else, another galaxy, or perhaps a myriad of galaxies, has already been completely devoured by them. And this galaxy, the home of humanity, of the Eldar, of the Orcs, and of all others who call the Milky Way home, is simply the next meal. Yet even terrible truths require a name, and the name the Imperium assigned to this colossal life form was not born of understanding, but of utter desperation. Tyranids, a simple word, originates from a world named Tyran, located on the eastern fringe of the galaxy. It was here that humanity first recorded the undeniable presence of this alien species, moments before that planet disappeared entirely from the stellar maps. Tyran was once a simple survey world belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not a particularly remarkable or rich planet. It hosted only a small biological research team, a few engineers surveying mineral deposits, and an orbital communications station that sent routine reports back to Mars. until one day the reports simply ceased. There was no distress signal, no explanation, only an abrupt silence, as if someone had deliberately turned off the switch. When a small Mechanicus exploratory team arrived months later, finding the loss of a peripheral world a low priority, they found a dead planet. There were no cities, no forests, and no oceans. Only a barren, uniform, grey surface, utterly stripped of all life. Upon that surface, they found the samples. Fragments of chitinous bone, strange biological tissue, and signs of metal corroded by an unknown acid. These samples matched no known species in the Mechanicus's vast libraries. They collected the specimens. They named the creatures after the planet where they were first found, Tyranids, and they sent their report back to Terra, unaware that they had just named the greatest existential threat the galaxy would ever face. That was how humanity came to know them. Not through a heroic encounter, not through an epic battle, but through a single dead planet and a pile of biological samples in a remote laboratory. A name given to something completely misunderstood, a mere label applied to sheer cosmic helplessness. But Tyran was only the start, or rather, the point at which humanity realized the consumption had already begun. As the Imperium began to trace backwards, scouring historical records, missing ship reports, and accounts of worlds that had vanished without explanation, they realized that the Tyranids had been present for much longer than anyone had imagined. And when they began to map the invasion routes, the lines of advance, and the Hive fleets themselves, they saw a pattern that turned the blood cold in the veins of Terra's most senior strategists. The first major Hive fleet was designated Behemoth. It struck from the eastern fringe, the most distant edge of the galaxy from the light of Terra, moving like an unstoppable biological tide. There was no advance warning. The shadow in the warp concealed all signals. Border worlds went silent, one by one, like candles being snuffed out in the wind. When the Imperium finally mobilized its battle fleets and summoned its space marine chapters, Behemoth had already penetrated deep into Imperial territory, aiming directly for the heart of Ultramar, the realm governed by the Ultramarines, one of the most powerful and well-organized Astartes chapters. The resultant conflict centered upon Macragge, the Ultramarines' home world, a fortified planet defended by massive battlements. This was the First Tyrannic War, a battle so brutal that it left a permanent scar upon the chapter. The entire First Company, comprised of their most elite Terminator veterans, was completely annihilated in a desperate last stand. Other companies suffered similarly crippling losses. Yet, in the end, Behemoth was seemingly defeated. The Hive fleet was largely crushed in space battles, and the organisms on the ground were destroyed in waves. The Imperium declared a victory. Naive scholars believed the threat was over. They were profoundly wrong. Behemoth was not the entire Hive fleet. It was merely a single, enormous branch of something far larger, and that branch had learned a terrible lesson. The second major Hive fleet was named Kraken. It arrived in the year 992 of the 41st millennium, triggering the Second Tyrannic War, and it did not repeat Behemoth's era. Instead of concentrating on a single target, Kraken fractured. It split into multiple tendrils, smaller branches that attacked various sectors simultaneously, making it utterly impossible for the Imperium to concentrate its forces. Kraken was faster, more flexible, and vastly more cunning. It attacked not from one direction, but from many at once, like a colossal, multi-limbed creature reaching out across the void. Worlds fell more quickly. Defensive lines collapsed faster, and this time there was no single decisive battle that could halt its advance. the Imperium was forced to fight on dozens, perhaps hundreds, of fronts simultaneously, each one a desperate war for survival. Kraken was never truly destroyed. It was scattered and pushed back, but not annihilated. Fragments of the fleet remain to this day, lurking in distant reaches of space, merging with derelict space hulks, waiting for the opportunity to recoalesce. And once again, the Imperium claimed victory, though the tone of the announcement was far less confident than before. Then came Leviathan, the largest, most terrifying and most strategically unorthodox Hive fleet ever recorded. Leviathan did not strike from the eastern fringe like its predecessors. Instead, it bypassed known routes entirely, emerging from below the galactic plane, the region beneath the galactic disk, a place with fewer stars, fewer planets and less life, and stabbed straight upwards, like a knife thrust from beneath the earth. It did not merely assault the outer edges, it drove straight towards the center, towards Segmentum Solar, the sector containing Terra itself, the very heart of the Imperium. Leviathan is not merely large, it is colossal. Reports from scouting teams, those few fortunate enough to survive long enough to transmit a signal, described a hive fleet stretching across hundreds of light years, containing millions, perhaps billions, of organisms. Its hive ships are so vast they can be seen with the naked eye from a planet's surface before they even enter orbit. And most terrifyingly of all, Leviathan advances on multiple fronts simultaneously, as if it were not a single fleet, but a vast network of interconnected fleets moving with a unified strategy so complex it defies human understanding. Leviathan has not stopped. It is still coming. Every passing year it draws closer. Every world that falls is another step forward. And the Imperium, with all its might, with all its space marines, its titans, and its void fleets, has yet to find a definitive means of halting its advance. They can only delay its inevitable arrival. They can only sacrifice one planet to defend the next. They can only pray that they have sufficient time to find a solution before Leviathan reaches Terra. 3 hive fleets, 3 distinct invasion paths. Yet, when Imperial scholars look at the galactic map and chart those lines of advance, Behemoth from the northeast, Kraken from the east, Leviathan from below, they realize a chilling, unifying truth. These are not 3 separate threats. They are 3 fingers of the same colossal hand, 3 branches of the same single will, 3 vast flows of the same biological ocean that is quietly creeping into the galaxy from every side. And if these are only 3 major branches, 3 fleets among countless others still traversing the cold space between galaxies, then where is the rest? How much biological mass is currently en route? How many Norn-Queens are breeding in the darkness? How many colossal hive ships are drifting through the frozen void, unhurried, unresting, heading toward this galaxy like sharks, sensing a distant scent of blood? The mathematicians of the Administratum have desperately tried to calculate the threat. They take data from the known fleets, estimate biological mass, movement speed, and vectors. They run their models, their equations, and their projections. And the results have driven some of them to utter madness. Because if the models hold true, if these 3 fleets are merely the visible tip of a cosmic iceberg, then the total biological mass of the Tyranids advancing on the galaxy may be greater than the total existing biomass currently within the galaxy itself. This is not an invasion, this is a replacement, one biological galaxy consuming another. But if the Tyranids truly originate from outside the galaxy, the next, most terrifying question remains: why here? Of the billions of galaxies available across the observable cosmos, why did they choose this one? There is a grim theory, a hypothesis recorded in the sealed archives of the Inquisition, scribbled in the ancient notations of censured scholars, and whispered by those who have read documents that should never be read. That theory revolves around an arcane device known as the Pharos. The Pharos was an ancient Xenos device, discovered on the planet Sotha during the Horus Heresy, the devastating civil war that tore the Imperium apart 10,000 years ago. It was not of human design, it was not Eldar. It belonged to no known living species. It was immeasurably ancient, built by a long-vanished civilization, and its function, as far as humanity could decipher, was that of a beacon. A device capable of projecting a signal through the warp, shining across the void like a cosmic lighthouse, providing navigational aid in the darkness of the immaterium. During the heresy, when the Imperium was severed and the Astronomicon, Terra's own guiding light, was obscured by the horrific ruin storm, the Pharos was activated. Robute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, used it to rally loyalist forces, guiding his fleets through the warp storms to prevent the temporary collapse of the Imperium Secundus. But during a desperate battle on Sotha, the Pharos was critically overloaded. Its energy exploded, not physically, but psychically, sending a colossal, blinding beam of light through the warp. It was a light so powerful it could be seen from anywhere in the galaxy, and perhaps, some scholars theorize, it could be seen from outside the galaxy. And some believe this. That was the moment the Tyranids first saw us. Imagine a species moving through the intergalactic void, perpetually hunting for new sources of biomass, listening for any sign of life. Suddenly, in the infinite darkness, a massive beacon ignites, a colossal psychic flash, too strong to ignore, shining from a galaxy bursting with life, packed with biomass, replete with green worlds that had never been harvested. That was not a warning. It was an invitation, a bell inadvertently rung, summoning something no one desired to meet. This hypothesis remains unconfirmed. There is no hard evidence, only the disturbing coincidence. The Pharos overloaded approximately 10,000 years ago, and the Tyranids appeared roughly 10,000 years later, sufficient time for something to cross the intergalactic void, either sublight or through unknown warp currents, to arrive here. Sufficient time for an eternal hunger to hear the bell and begin its journey. If this theory is correct, if humanity accidentally called the Tyranids to its doorstep by a reckless act in the distant past, then that is a dark tragedy that defies all vocabulary. For it would mean that every world destroyed, every life lost, and every single ache suffered in the tyrannic wars, all traced back to a single moment in the deep past, when someone lit a powerful candle in the vast darkness, unaware that something was indeed listening intently. Yet, even before the massive hive fleets appeared, even before the name Tyranids was coined, there were signs, small, easily dismissed clues that, viewed in retrospect, paint a clear picture. The Tyranids had already been in the galaxy for a long time, not as fleets, but as seeds, Genestealers. These creatures crawl through space hulks, the colossal derelict vessels adrift in the void, drifting in and out of the warp uncontrollably. They lurk in the dark corridors and rusting engine rooms, waiting silently. When a foolish exploratory vessel docks with the space hulk, or when a salvage crew boards, the Genestealers attack, not primarily to kill, but to infect. They implant their genes into the victims, and the victims, unaware they have been tainted, return home to their planets, their cities, and begin to breed. And those children are no longer fully human. They are hybrids, half human, half Tyranid, carrying within them an instinctive, unquestioning loyalty to the Hive Mind. The Genestealer Cults form in the shadows, spreading over generations, becoming vast secret organizations within the very fabric of human society. They worship the Tyranids as divine harbingers. They await the day the Hive fleet arrives as the promised time of salvation. And when the fleet does appear, they rise up from within, sabotaging defense systems, assassinating commanders, and opening the gates for the invaders. They are the Tyranids' advance guard, the seeds planted centuries before, germinating precisely when needed to ensure the planet collapses with ease. And now, when the Imperium looks back at its history, tracing the reports of strange cults on distant worlds, the unexplained disappearances, the appearance and vanishing of space hulks, they realize that the Genestealers have been here for millennia, perhaps since before the arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth. They are fragmented pieces of the Tyranids, the biological vanguard, sowing the ground, preparing the soil for the great hunger to come. As scholars now stare at the galactic map, tracing the lines of advance of Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan, observing the spreading dark zones where the shadow in the warp eclipses the light, they are left with a single, overwhelming truth. These are only the visible signs. The actual, full biological mass of the Tyranids is still out there, in the deep dark between the galaxies, moving slowly but inexorably towards the light source that the Pharos accidentally ignited 10,000 years ago. No one knows where they were born. No one knows how many galaxies they have consumed before arriving here. No one knows if there is any way to halt them. They know only one thing: they are coming. And when they finally arrive in their totality, when the entire Hive Mind focuses its attention on this galaxy, when every Norn-Queen begins breeding using the combined biomass of thousands of consumed worlds, that is when the true war will finally begin. And that will not be a war between empires, nor between faiths, but a war between life and hunger, between the galaxy and the thing that seeks to swallow it whole. A nameless hunger from a nameless place has crossed the cold void of intergalactic space to reach us. And now, this galaxy, our galaxy, may be nothing more than an unfinished meal in a journey that has no end. Does the Imperium have enough time to prepare, or did the accidental lighting of a long-dead beacon seal its ultimate fate? Hive Mind, the Unnamed Will. There are forms of power that humanity can understand simply by comparison. An emperor, a sovereign, issues decrees that govern an entire imperium. A chaos god, a ruinous power, manipulates its followers through sheer emotion and primal desire. An orc war boss, a mighty greenskin leader, directs his horde through raw strength and savage instinct. These are all forms of authority that the human mind, however repelled by them, can still clearly frame. There is a leader, there are followers, there are clear hierarchies. Individual wills may clash, but they can ultimately be negotiated with or defeated. But the Hive Mind is utterly different. The Hive Mind is not a king. It is not a god. It is not a single individual standing at the pinnacle of a pyramid issuing commands downwards. It is the entire pyramid, or rather, it is the complete absence of a hierarchy based on separate ego. It is a profound gestalt consciousness, a unified mind that arises from the psychic connection of trillions, perhaps quadrillions, of organisms simultaneously. It is stretched across space to such a degree that the human concepts of near and far become wholly meaningless. Every gaunt in a trench on the eastern fringe, every hive ship drifting in orbit above an unnamed world, every Norn-Queen lying deep within its humid breeding chamber, All are fully and inherently a part of the hive mind. There is no clear boundary between the individual and the collective. There is no I and us. There is only one infinite us, a single monolithic will that has dispersed itself into countless forms to perform its sole function, to consume, to learn, and to grow. That is precisely why, when one slays a Tyranid creature, it feels no fear. Because in the cold perception of the hive mind, there is no death of an individual, only the temporary loss of one cell from a colossal body. And that body experiences no pain. It merely records the event. This tactic was ineffective. Adjustment is required. That is why the Tyranids never retreat due to panic and never surrender out of desperation. Because those concepts, panic, desperation, hope, pride, are tied to the single individual ego. And the hive mind possesses no ego. It possesses only purpose. And that purpose, in the chilling silence between the stars, propagates like a thin psychic mist, faceless and voiceless. Yet it is a command that reverberates deep within the very bone marrow of the swarm. But how can a will so immeasurably vast, a consciousness spanning thousands of light years, coordinate millions of battlefronts while controlling every small organism on a distant world? How can the hive mind command a single gaunt to dig a trench, a carnifex to breach a wall, and a harpy to bomb from above, all in the same second, on the same battlefield, without any delay caused by distance? The answer is synapse. Synapse is not a technological form of communication. It is not radio waves. It is not an encrypted signal. It is a profound psychic connection, a current flowing through the warp, an invisible thread linking the hive mind down to every organism. This allows the collective will to flow like electricity through a vast biological nervous network. However, that current needs focal points. It requires creatures strong enough and complex enough to receive the distant commands and efficiently transmit them to the simpler organisms around them. These are the synapse creatures, the living, forward-operating relay stations of the hive mind's will. Imagine a battlefield. Thousands of gaunts are charging, small, weak organisms bred to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Individually, they are no smarter than a scavenging hound. They know no strategy. They have no plan. They only know to run, bite, kill, and eat. But when a hive tyrant steps onto that battlefield, a creature as tall as a dreadnought, with chitinous armor as thick as a battle tank, 4 arms bearing bioweapons capable of tearing an Astartes squad apart, the entire swarm of gaunts around it changes. Not slowly, but instantaneously. It is as if a mental switch has been flicked inside their simple minds. They stop rushing haphazardly. They begin to move in tight formations. They attack with sophisticated coordination, one group distracting while another flanks, a third waiting in ambush for the enemy's retreat. They are no longer a chaotic swarm of insects. They become a disciplined army. Yet, synapse is only half of the story. The other half, the part that makes the Tyranids a threat not only militarily but psychically, is the shadow in the warp. The shadow in the warp is not a weapon. It is not a deliberate psychic attack. It is simply the terrifying consequence of the hive mind's presence, a byproduct of a consciousness too vast, too powerful, and too massive for the warp to contain without severe distortion. Imagine the warp as a thin sheet of silk, a fabric that astropaths use to transmit messages and navigators use to chart their course. But when the hive mind appears, it does not travel across the fabric. It presses down upon the fabric, like a colossal iron sphere placed upon that silk sheet. The fabric does not tear. it is stretched, distorted, creating a deep, massive depression that makes it impossible for anything else on the fabric to move, to breathe, or to cry out for help. However, here is a strange fact, one that Imperial scholars took centuries to analyze. The shadow in the warp does not only affect humans, the Eldar, and other warp-using races. It also affects chaos, daemons, entities born directly from the warp and nourished by raw emotion, find it severely difficult to fully manifest within the region covered by the shadow in the warp. It is not impossible, but it is demonstrably harder. It is as if a dense membrane has formed between the warp and the material universe, making transit significantly more energy expensive. The sorcerers of chaos, those dark practitioners of warp magic, feel the shadow as a suffocating restraint, a resistance that makes their psychic powers weaker, slower, and far more difficult to control. This leads to a bizarre philosophical question. If the warp is fueled by emotion, by anger, fear, hope, and ambition, then where does an intellect like the Hive Mind, a mind utterly devoid of emotion, stand in the cosmic balance? Is it something truly external to the warp? Or is it simply a different form of existence, a purely biological consciousness that neither needs the warp to survive nor is affected by it in the way other species are? Some scholars hypothesize that the hive mind does not belong to the warp. It is not a spiritual entity, even though it utilizes the warp to transmit its signals. It is a biological consciousness, a living neural network stretching across the material universe, only touching the warp as a necessary tool, much like a human uses a radio without being a radio wave. This would explain why daemons cannot possess a Tyranid, as there is no single, separate soul to own, only an impersonal network with no clear beginning or end. It also explains why the shadow in the warp is not an active attack. It is simply the byproduct of an intellect that is too vast, too physical, when it interacts with a dimension built entirely from emotion. But no one knows for sure, and perhaps no one ever will. For to fully study the hive mind, one must immerse oneself within it, and once one immerses oneself within it, one never returns unchanged. Looking at the full tactical picture, observing the three major hive fleets advancing from three different directions, the strategists of the Imperium realize one more dreadful truth. Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan are not three separate threats. They are three branches of the same intellect, three lobes of the same vast brain. Each fleet has a unique tactical approach, Behemoth charging, Kraken dispersing, Leviathan encircling, but they all share a unified baseline of coordination. They all learn from one another. When Behemoth was defeated at Macragge, the entire hive mind recorded the event. Kraken did not repeat Behemoth's mistakes. Leviathan did not repeat Kraken's errors. Every fleet is an experiment, a tactical trial, gathering data and reporting it back to something far larger, still waiting on the galactic edge, perpetually learning. That is the true nightmare of the Tyranids. It is not their terrifying strength, immense though it is. It is not their limitless numbers. It is their profound, absolute unity. A single will that never experiences internal conflict, never suffers doubt, and never engages in civil war. While the Imperium is fragmented by internal politics and religious dogma, and chaos is divided by its competing gods, the Tyranids are never divided. They are one. And a will that is never divided is a will that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be corrupted, and cannot be persuaded. It can only be fought. And even when fought successfully, it learns. And the next time, it will be stronger. But the hive mind, vast and potent though it is not an omnipotent deity. It has limitations, It cannot be present everywhere simultaneously with equal intensity. That is why it desperately requires the synapse creatures to extend its reach. That is why when a hive fleet is severed, dispersed, or pushed away from its main synapse sources, its combat effectiveness immediately plummets. The smaller organisms become utterly lost. The attacks become disorganized. Not because the hive mind is weak, but because the crucial connection is compromised. Like a body that has its blood circulation severed, the brain remains. But the limbs receive no oxygen, no precise instructions, and begin to flail chaotically. This provides the only fragile hope for the species within the galaxy. Not to destroy the hive mind, for no one knows how to do that, but to sever it, to break the synapse network, to destroy the hive ships before they enter orbit, to slay the synapse creatures faster than they can be spawned, to turn an organized invasion into a chaotic mess and then destroy the fragments piece by piece. But this demands impossible speed, overwhelming power, and terrible sacrifice. And even if successful, the hive mind will simply record the outcome. This tactic failed. Modification is required. The next time, there will be more hive ships. The next time, there will be more synapse creatures, more dispersed and better protected. The next time, the shadow in the warp will be thicker and spread further, making the possibility of summoning aid even more remote. That is the loop. That is the true destiny of a war against an intellect that never sleeps, never forgets, and never pardons, not out of malice, but out of pure biological function. In all of this, in the hive mind, in the synapse, and in the shadow in the warp, there is one critical detail that opens the next chapter. How does the hive mind create its new organisms? How does it transform the data gathered from the battlefield into biological forms? How does it precisely adjust, adapt, and recombine the genes from thousands of consumed organisms to breed the perfect bioforms for the next environment? The answer lies with the Norn-Queens, the massive biological organs that reside within the hive ships. Creatures that never fight, yet form the very heart of the entire cycle of consumption and rebirth. They are where the hive mind becomes physical form, where the will becomes flesh and bone. Their work, how they devour biomass, analyze genes, design new creatures, and spawn them from boiling nutrient pools, is a biological marvel that is as terrifying as it is astonishing. But that is the story for the next chapter. For now, we need only know this. The hive mind is not merely a will. It is a perfect process, a biological entity thinking on the scale of stars. And in the great silence between those stars, a nameless command still reverberates. Not in words, not in sound, but in the collective heartbeat of trillions of organisms perpetually moving, perpetually consuming, perpetually waiting. If this will possesses no ego, no emotion, and no purpose beyond hunger, what language does the universe possess to negotiate with it? Norn-Queens, the womb of hunger. There are Tyranid organisms that humanity can see, touch, and shoot. The Gaunts charging from the trenches, the Carnifex crushing the tanks, the Hive Tyrant standing as a biological general amidst the fray. These are the visible faces of the invasion, the targets that guardsmen can aim their rifles at, the creatures that generals can draw battle plans against, the monsters that scholars can catalogue and classify. But behind all of them, hidden deep within the colossal hive ships that silently drift in orbit, there exist creatures that almost no one has ever truly seen, life forms that never set foot upon a planetary surface, never see the light of a planet's sun, and never need to engage in combat. Yet, they are more critically important than any warrior, for they are the ultimate source of all. They are the living factories, the biological wombs, the evolutionary architects of the Tyranids. They are the Norn-Queens. A Norn-Queen is not a military commander, nor is it a psyker, nor is it a warrior. It is a single, dedicated function, the reproductive and genetic recombination engine of the entire Hive fleet. Every large Hive ship houses at least one Norn-Queen within its deepest, darkest, and most humid chambers. Spaces with no windows, no natural light, only the faint bioluminescence from the organic circuits running along the walls. These chambers are not designed for war, they are designed for creation. And within them, the Norn-Queen lies still, an immense, immovable life form, its body a monstrous mountain of flesh and biological membranes, connected to thousands of conduits that channel nutrients in and finished organisms out. It issues no sound, it needs no voice. Every single contraction of its massive form is the silent birth of a new army. The rare records from the Adeptus Mechanicus, those reports transmitted by assault teams who have successfully breached a Hive ship and survived long enough to relay data, describe the Norn-Queen as an organism that cannot be fully categorized. It has no fixed shape. Some reports state it is as large as a building. Some say it stretches across vast, dark tunnels. Others claim that the boundary between the organism and its surrounding environment is blurred, that the chamber wall and the Norn-Queen's own skin merge, and that the entire chamber is one singular, living organ. But all reports agree on one point. When one stands before a Norn-Queen, one does not feel that one is facing a single creature. One feels that one is standing inside a factory with no metal machinery, no cogs or pistons, only flesh, membranes and biological fluids circulating through vast, translucent tubes, accompanied by the slow, steady, pulsing sound of life being manufactured. To truly understand the Norn-Queen, one must understand the reverse flow of nutrition. The cycle where the biomass of a consumed planet is transformed into a new army. It begins on the surface, the reclamation pools, the gigantic digestive vats where every slain creature, every plant and every particle of organic matter is deposited. Biological acid dissolves everything, bone, flesh, leaves, bacteria, even mineral-bearing rock, transforming it into a thick, viscous green nutrient soup, rich in proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and, most importantly, genetic material. From these vast pools, the nutrition is pumped up the capillary towers and then blasted into orbit via powerful biopropulsion streams directly into the bellies of the Hive ships. Within the Hive ships, this stream of raw biomass flows through a complex network of internal conduits, where it is filtered, refined, and meticulously categorized. Unnecessary substances are expelled into the void. Essential materials, particularly DNA and protein sequences, are routed towards storage chambers near the vessel's center. And finally, they empty into the large, steaming pools that surround the Norn-Queen, those nutrient-rich baths filled with the sickeningly sweet, heavy scent of decaying and reassembling life. The Norn-Queen lies within this bath like an island of meat, absorbing the nutrition through its skin, membranes, and its thousands of capillary ducts. And as it absorbs, it analyses. It reads the genes. It records the information. It begins to recombine. Specialized organisms, sometimes called coffin crawlers, even carry raw living tissue samples directly from the battlefield back to the Norn-Queen's chamber. A shard of space marine flesh still clinging to the armor, a piece of orc bone still containing marrow, a fragment of leaf from a newly consumed world. Each piece is data. Every gene sequence is a lesson. The Norn-Queen does not merely eat, it learns. And from what it learns, it designs. This process is not reproduction in the natural sense. The Norn-Queen manufactures. This is asexual reproduction combined with hyper-accelerated genetic direction. Every single Tyranid organism born from the Norn-Queen is not a random clone. It is a precise, purpose-built design, perfectly optimized for a specific task, a specific environment, and a specific enemy. If the swarm requires a creature that can withstand extreme heat, the Norn-Queen retrieves the heat-resistant gene from a desert reptile consumed on the previous world, combines it with a gene for thick chitin armor from a crustacean from another planet, inserts it into the framework of a warrior, and immediately spawns a new Tyranid variant, a life form that has never existed before, but is now perfectly suited for the next deployment. If a new bioweapon is needed to breach a Terminator shield, the Norn-Queen analyses the armor fragments, isolates the weakness in the structure, and designs a new type of acid, or a new claw type, or a new ranged bioweapon to penetrate it with ruthless efficiency. This astonishing process is ceaseless. Thousands of creatures are born every day. Some are simple gaunts, mass-produced according to the standard template. Others are slightly modified warriors, given an extra layer of armor over a recently discovered weak point. And still others are entirely new experiments, bioforms yet to be named, dropped onto a battlefield to see how long they survive. If they prove effective, the Hive Mind logs the design, and the next generation will contain more of them. If they fail, the design is discarded without regret, without hesitation. This is evolution achieved not over millions of years, but over mere weeks. It is natural selection that has been brutally accelerated, controlled, and directly guided by a singular, intelligent will. And through all this, the Norn-Queen never leaves its chamber. It does not need to. It sees the battlefield through the Hive Mind. It feels the environment through the synapse creatures. It knows whether the next planet is cold or hot, dry or humid, airless or oxygen-rich. It knows whether the enemy wears metal armor or biological tissue, uses lasers or solid rounds, possesses psychers or does not. And from that data, it meticulously adjusts the production line, manufacturing the correct organism in the correct quantity at the correct moment. The Norn-Queen, however, is not a passive factory. It is a direct limb of the Hive Mind, an organ that can express that will in specific, targeted ways. The most visible manifestation of this is the Norn Emissary, the Queen's designated messenger. The Norn Emissary is not an ordinary creature. It is born with a single, overriding purpose: to represent the Norn-Queen on the battlefield and to execute missions that cannot be entrusted to common synapse creatures. It is immense, taller than a hive tyrant, its body covered in incredibly thick chitinous armor and strange biological organs found on no other bioform. More importantly, it carries a unique psychic scent, a faint but clear warp signature that allows it to track targets of particular interest to the Hive Mind. Powerful psychers, crucial commanders, or persistent threats that cannot be ignored. The Norn Emissary is the physical hand of the Norn-Queen reaching out onto the field, a direct link between the silent womb and the chaotic frontline, between the place of creation and the place of destruction. But this, too, is a vulnerability of the Tyranids. The Norn-Queen, crucial and powerful though it may be, is ultimately a single physical creature. It can be wounded, it can be slain. And if that event occurs, the consequences for the Hive fleet are catastrophic. A Hive ship that loses its Norn-Queen is like a body that loses its heart. It does not die instantly, but it can no longer generate replacement forces. The organisms previously spawned continue to fight, but as they are destroyed, no new generation replaces them. The hive fleet slowly bleeds out, one life form at a time, until nothing remains but the husks of empty hive ships drifting in the void. That is why the Norn-Queen is always positioned in the very heart of the largest hive ships, protected by layers upon layers of biological shielding, meters thick, by narrow corridors filled with deadly biological traps, by thousands of tireless, ever-vigilant guardian organisms. To reach the Norn-Queen requires penetrating the entirety of the vast living vessel, and very few have ever succeeded. Adeptus Astartes assault teams have tried, some have succeeded, but the price paid is always the lives of hundreds of space marines. And even when a Norn-Queen is destroyed, countless others remain on other hive ships, and the Hive Mind will simply record the failure. Next time, the defense will be thicker, the traps will be deadlier, and the path will be harder to find. And in all of this, in those dark, humid chambers, in the steady pulsing, in the stream of biomass flowing from a dying planet up to the womb of hunger, there is one profound truth humanity struggles to accept. The Norn-Queen is not evil. It takes no pleasure in breeding creatures that will kill. It bears no malice. It is simply performing a function, like a factory, like a biological process. It does not create new life in the human sense, possessing no maternal love, no hope for the next generation, no dreams of a future. It simply recycles life into the tools of instinctual hunger, a vast genetic workshop eternally redefining what it means to be born under the cold gaze of the Great Devourer. If the Hive Mind is the ultimate will, then the Norn-Queen is the physical organ that translates that will into action. If the synapse is the nervous system, then the Norn-Queen is the bone marrow, the very source that generates the blood, the bone, and all that the body requires to continue its terrible existence. Should the Imperium ever wish to halt the Tyranids, they must find a way to destroy not the gaunts in the trenches, nor the carnifex crushing the tanks, but the Norn-Queens themselves, deep within the hive ships, creatures that never fight, but are the singular reason why the war can never truly end. And until that day, every steady, silent contraction of the Norn-Queen will continue, like the tireless pump of life, and with every beat, a new army will be born. If the very source of the swarm lies in places that no one can reach, does victory still mean eliminating the enemy, or merely delaying the day when all comes to an end? Chapter 6. The Forms of the Hunger. In the universe of Warhammer 40K, every species has its own distinct way of naming the instruments of war that it creates. The Imperium of Mankind calls them weapons, tanks, and battlecruisers, titles laden with glory, with tales of heroism, and with victories carved upon marble. The Orcs call them toys, big hammers, and fast troops. Simple, enthusiastic names that perfectly reflect the pure, exhilarating joy of violence. The Eldar name them using ancient, profound words, each term carrying millennia of shared history and deep sorrow. But the Tyranids do not name their creations. They have absolutely no need to, because to the Hive Mind, there is no individual, only function. Every physical form is a single, resonant note in the great symphony of cosmic hunger. Every organism is a simple tool designed for one specific task, one specific environment, and one specific moment in time. And when that task is completed, that tool can be discarded, swiftly replaced, or simply recycled back into biomass to create a newer, better tool. There are no heroes. There are no monuments. There is only biology performing its terrible, ceaseless function. And that function, the immense, terrifying work of consuming an entire planet, grinding its defense into dust and collecting every particle of biomass, requires a complex biological orchestra. In this orchestra, every organism plays a distinct, crucial role, and every functional layer connects seamlessly, like the necessary organs within one colossal, single body. From the skies above to the subterranean depths below, the entire swarm pulses and changes rhythm to the beat of one invisible heart. And when the fury finally subsides and the dust settles, all that remains is biomass, recorded onto the vast ledger of the Hive ships. This is the deadly hierarchy, the phylum of an army that never tires and never yields. The opening layer of every Tyranid invasion always begins with pressure. Not the immediate pressure of heavy firepower, not yet, but the relentless, suffocating pressure of sheer numbers. Waves of small creatures, weak when considered individually, yet when they arrive in the thousands, the tens of thousands, even the most formidable human formation begins to sway and crumble. These are the Gaunts, the vanguard organisms of the swarm, the very first notes in the biological symphony. Termagants, the most ubiquitous type of Gaunt, stand approximately 1.5 meters tall, moving on two slender legs, their forelimbs armed with organic bioweapons for short-range fire. They are not intelligent. Individually, they are weaker than an average Imperial Guardsman. But they never, ever arrive individually. They come in teeming packs, dark grey waves, their chitinous shells glinting under the glare of artillery fire, moving with a blurring speed that is difficult for the human eye to track. They do not run in straight lines. They weave across the battlefield, leaping over shell craters, scuttling over debris, hiding behind the corpses of their own kind, only to instantly spring forward when the enemy pauses to reload. When synapse creatures are nearby, termagants become cunning on a microscale. They know to disperse when met with concentrated fire, to instantly regroup when they find a weakness, and to provide covering fire for the larger variants advancing from the rear. But when the synapse link is severed, they immediately revert to pure chaotic instinct, rushing blindly, attacking anything that moves, sometimes even turning on each other when no clear enemy remains. Hormogaunts, the dedicated close combat Gaunt variant, operate quite differently. They do not shoot, they only run. And they run terrifyingly fast. Fast enough to cross the open ground between two trench lines in mere seconds, vaulting over razor wire and dropping directly into formations to begin tearing and rending. The claws of a Hormagaunt are designed to slice through flesh and light armor. They may not pierce the heavy armor of a Space Marine, but they can tear apart a single PDF soldier in a matter of seconds. The essential role of the Hormagaunt is not to hold ground. Its function is to violently break the front line, to create chaos, and to open a clear breach for the heavier layer advancing behind them. They are the initial piercing spike, a spike designed to snap off after impact, yet having ensured they leave a severe wound behind. And from the skies, gargoyles, the winged Gaunt variant, descend. They are not large, and they are not strong, but they fly in suffocating dense flocks, obscuring the sky like a dark, moving cloud. As they swoop down, they do not merely attack, they blind. Gargoyles destroy radar dishes, cripple communication antennae, and overload air defense systems with too many small, fast, chaotic targets to calculate. They are the first wave to sow aerial fear. The shrieking sound of thousands of chitinous wings beating the air, the dark shadow obscuring the moon, and the chilling feeling that the sky itself is alive and holds a deep, cold malice toward you. By the time the larger creatures arrive, the low-altitude airspace already belongs entirely to the swarm. And when the battlefield briefly settles, after the gaunts have died in the thousands, after the gargoyles have fallen to the ground like organic rain, the Ripper swarms appear. They are small, tunneling creatures, scuttling forward in immense swarms of hundreds, and they do not fight, they eat. Rippers are the omnivorous larvae of the swarm, the simplest biological organisms, possessing little more than mandibles and a massive, ever-hungry stomach. They flood the contested ground, tearing apart every piece of organic matter, human corpses, Tyranid corpses, trees, wood, fabric, leather, flesh, and rapidly shoveling it into their mouths. They do not discriminate. They simply consume. And what they consume, they do not fully digest. They convert it into partially processed biological mass, which they drag back to the reclamation pools, the vats of corrosive biological acid where everything is ultimately dissolved into nutrient soup and pumped up to the hive ships. Rippers are the swarm's forward digestive organ. They are the reason why no dead are ever buried, no bones are ever left, and no memorial stands long after the Tyranids have departed. But gaunts and rippers are merely simple tools. For them to operate effectively, there must be creatures that keep the rhythm, synapse focal points close enough to transmit the will of the hive mind to the front line, strong enough to resist easy destruction, and flexible enough to move with the rapidly changing battlefield. These are the Tyranid warriors, the very backbone of the swarm. Warriors stand nearly 3 meters tall, possessing 4 arms, each capable of bearing either lethal, close combat weapons or potent, ranged bioweapons, depending on their design. They are not as immense as the Carnifex, nor as stealthy as the Lictor, but they are fundamentally necessary. This is because warriors simultaneously fight and function as synapse creatures. When a squad of warriors moves into an area, the entire swarm of gaunts around them instantly changes. They stop their chaotic rushing. They begin to coordinate. They know precisely when to advance, when to fall back, and when to sacrifice themselves to open a path for the layer behind. Warriors are the biological officers, issuing commands not with a voice, but by transmitting the hive mind's will like electricity through a conductor. They position themselves amidst the smaller units, maintaining the synapse network continuously, ensuring the swarm operates as a cohesive single body. But this crucial function is also a vulnerability. When a cluster of warriors is destroyed, when a lucky artillery shell finds its mark, when a squad of space marines concentrates its fire, the surrounding area falls out of rhythm. The gaunts suddenly lose their guiding voice. They still fight, but they lose their direction. They still attack, but they lose all coordination. That is the rare, fleeting moment when humanity can successfully counterattack before another warrior moves in, or a stronger synapse creature appears from the rear, and the network is violently restored. That is the constant high-stakes game of the tyrannic wars. Not to kill every single creature, for there is never enough ammunition, but to constantly sever the synapse, turning the swarm into a disorganized mob, and then destroying the fragments before they can possibly reorganize. Once the defense lines have been critically weakened by the gaunts, and the warriors have established the corridor of advance, the heavy creatures appear colossal, dense biological masses designed not for hunting, but for sheer, overwhelming destruction. The Carnifex, known by human forces as the swarm's construction vehicle, is the ultimate embodiment of brute power. It is as tall as a dreadnought, weighs as much as a main battle tank, and its chitin armor is so thick that even high-powered laser fire often ricochets harmlessly off it like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. The Carnifex is not fast. It does not need to be fast. It only needs to move forward. Every single footstep leaves a deep depression in the earth. Every bone-crushing charge is sufficient to smash concrete walls, flatten trenches, and overturn armored vehicles. The Carnifex does not fight with strategy. It fights with sheer, unbridled mass. It is a biological hammer, utterly unsubtle, yet devastatingly effective. When a Carnifex advances upon a fortified line, the defenders are left with no choice but to retreat or face certain death. And even if they retreat, the Carnifex has fulfilled its mission. The door has been violently opened, and the swarm is now flooding in. The Screamer Killer variant, a classic line of Carnifex, is even more terrifying. It does not only charge, it fires bioplasma, a secreted biological weapon that ejects volatile balls of superheated plasma sufficient to melt power armor or incinerate an entire squad in a confined bunker. And when it fires, it emits a piercing, high-pitched shriek, an organic siren that broadcasts a chilling warning to all who hear it. Something truly horrific is arriving. The Screamer Killer is one of the oldest recorded forms from the early days of the Tyranid invasion, a timeless symbol of the consuming hunger, a nightmare walking on legs as thick as pillars. To this day, it remains the creature that PDF commanders pray they never have to encounter on the battlefield. But not every objective requires a hammer. Some targets require a precise knife, a silent, sharp blade that is never seen until the moment it is far too late. That is the Lictor. The Lictor is a terrifying master of biological concealment. Its chameleonic skin continuously shifts color, blending into the surrounding environment as water is absorbed by cloth. It moves without sound, every footstep carefully measured, every breath absolutely controlled. It can remain perfectly still in the middle of a battlefield, and you would not detect it until it makes physical contact. The Lictor's role is not open combat. Its function is to unlock defense lines, to assassinate senior officers, to destroy communications relay stations, to sow chaos deep behind the lines, and, most importantly, to gather information. The Lictor is the eyes and ears of the Hive Mind, operating in the deepest reaches of enemy territory. It observes, it records, and it transmits the vital data back through its powerful psychic connection. Once the Hive fleet knows enough, once it knows where the defense is weakest, where the ammunition depots are located, where the commanders sleep, the swarm arrives, and the defense collapses not from a lack of strength, but because every vital artery was severed before the battle had even begun. And if the Lictor is the knife, then the Trigon is the enormous drill. The Trigon, the Tyranid earth serpent, is a colossal burrowing creature. Its body as long as a freight train, its serrated, spinning mandibles capable of grinding solid bedrock into fine powder. It does not attack from the front, it attacks from below. The Trigon tunnels through soft earth, through hard bedrock, and through concrete foundations, carving a massive pathway for the swarm, an underground passage from outside the perimeter directly into the center of the fortification. And when it erupts from the ground, when the earth swells, cracks open, and a massive, tooth-filled head emerges, it is already far too late for the defenders. The Trigon does not attack alone. It opens the way for an entire tidal wave of gaunts and warriors that immediately follow the tunnel it has just carved, emerging directly into the heart of the enemy formation, transforming the battlefield into an utter, immediate rout. The Morlock variant, the Trigon's close sibling, is even more devastating psychologically. It does not carve a path, it hunts. The Morlock tunnels randomly around the battle zone, erupting in places no one expects, striking one sudden, massive blow, and then diving back beneath the surface before anyone can react. It does not stay to fight. It leaves only devastating seismic shockwaves, streaks of blood, and a pervasive, crippling terror. The fear that the ground beneath one's feet is no longer safe, that at any moment the earth may split and a colossal, devouring mouth will appear to swallow you whole. This is a terrifying psychological weapon, and it proves ruthlessly effective. But not every threat is physical. Some dangers emerge from the warp, from the raw psychic energy that the hive mind can harness through specialized, dedicated organisms. These are the zoanthropes. The zoanthrope floats effortlessly in the air, requiring no legs or wings, simply using potent psychic power to push its own body upwards. Its head is disproportionately large, its body shriveled and free of unnecessary muscle, because the zoanthrope does not fight physically. It fights with the warp. It harnesses the hive mind's collective psychic energy, the colossal, invisible pressure that bears down on the warp like a mountain, and releases it in focused beams of pure, unadulterated energy. A single zoanthrope can melt a battle tank in seconds. It can shatter a space marine's bones inside his power armor. It can cause a hostile psyker's brain to explode inside his own skull. Crucially, the zoanthrope is also a highly powerful synapse creature, a psychic broadcaster that maintains a stronger, farther-reaching synapse network, allowing the hive mind to retain absolute control even when the battlefield extends over tens of kilometers. The neurothrope, an advanced variant of the zoanthrope, is even more dread-inducing. It does not just fire energy, it absorbs life force from surrounding organisms, from dying enemies, from its own expiring Tyranids, converting that stolen vitality into raw psychic power to sustain itself and other nearby zoanthropes. The neurothrope is the center of a zoanthrope group, a biological brain that keeps the entire unit operating stably, powerfully, and tirelessly. And when a pack of zoanthropes led by a neurothrope appears on the battlefield, even the enormous Imperial Titans must take immediate heed. But not every battle allows for direct, close-quarters engagement. Some crucial targets are hidden behind walls, deep within bunkers, or behind impassable mountain ranges. And that is when the Tyranids deploy their biological artillery, not metal cannons, but creatures that fire other living organisms. Biovores, small, rotund, hunchbacked creatures, are the indirect fire support of the swarm. They do not fire shells. They birth ammunition. Within the biovore's body is a specialized biological chamber where it gestates smaller organisms called spore minds, living organic spheres that float via biogas, filled with volatile acid and organic explosives. The biovore spawns the spore mines and then launches them high into the air along a deliberate ballistic arc. These mines float slowly, drift on the wind, and they do not detonate upon immediate impact with the ground. They only explode when they detect a non-Tyranid organism nearby, highly sensitive to warmth, vibration, or the scent of unfamiliar flesh. When they detonate, they spray acid, razor-sharp chitin fragments and toxic spores into the air. A single spore mine can slay one man, 100 can utterly wipe out an entire formation. And the biovores never, ever cease generating them. Harpy and hive crone, the heavy flying beasts of the swarm, can also sow spore mines from high altitude, transforming entire sectors into fields of persistent biological hazard. The harpy flies low, dropping organic bombs and mines onto ground targets, shielding the subsequent ground assaults. The hive crone, the specialized aerial combat variant, uses tentaclids, to swat enemy aircraft from the sky like a powerful hawk catching a pigeon, and sprays drool cannon acid onto the ground when the airspace has been successfully cleared. Both are lethal aerial assassins, ensuring that no one can escape the planet by taking to the skies, for the air itself now utterly belongs to the swarm. And when the battlefield is thoroughly covered in spore mines, when the air is thick with spores, and when every footstep risks detonating a biological mine, the sporocysts begin to grow. These are spore chimneys, biological pillars that root themselves into the surface, spreading deep roots, spawning mines, releasing spores, and acting as forward bases to extend the swarm's biological agriculture. They are the logistical core, the crucial link between the battlefield and the reclamation pools that will inevitably be constructed later. They are undeniable proof that the swarm is not merely attacking, it is establishing its long-term, relentless occupation. And finally, when every other layer has completed its grim task, when the defense line is swaying and broken, the mobile fortresses arrive. Creatures designed not for charging, but for crushing the enemy from afar, or for sustaining the attack indefinitely. The Tervigon, the mobile womb, continuously spawns termagants directly onto the combat zone. It is not just a fighting creature, it is a biological factory. Inside the Tervigon's abdomen are complex gestation chambers, where termagants are spawned continuously, not from eggs, but from immediately reprocessed biomass. Beyond its production role, the Tervigon possesses a psychic ability called catalyst, which pushes the surrounding swarm into a state of gritted endurance, helping them survive much longer under enemy fire. And Dominion, a psychic ability that extends the synapse control radius, transforms the Tervigon into a moving broadcast station, ensuring the swarm is always expertly guided. When a Tervigon advances onto the battlefield, it is not one creature. It is a relentless, self-replenishing wave. The Tyrannifex, the biological tank, provides the swarm's absolute heaviest firepower. Its signature weapon is the rupture cannon, one of the most powerful bioweapons below the level of a bio-titan. Firing biological projectiles large enough to pierce Titan armor, powerful enough to smash fortress walls from kilometers away. The Tyrannifex moves slowly, not as quickly as a Carnifex, not as nimble as a warrior, but it does not need to be quick. It only needs to stand still and fire, and when it fires, whatever lies in front of it, tanks, bunkers, watchtowers, is reduced to ash and organic debris. The entire operation proceeds with a deadly, terrible rhythm. The sky, the ground, and the underground. When all these creatures appear simultaneously, when the Harpy and Hive Crones suppress the airspace, when the Gargoyles flood the low altitude, when the Termagants and Hormagaunts weave the first layer, when the warriors maintain the rhythm, when the Carnifex and Screamer Killer smash the defense lines, when the Trigon and Morlock strike from below, when the Rippers meticulously recycle the remains, when the Biovores scatter mines to cut off counterattacks, it ceases to be a battle. It becomes a colossal body, utterly focused on digestion, from the skies to the surface to the underground depths, from the opening wave to the heavy armored blocks to the silent shadows. Everything is bound together by the synapse, an invisible network that transforms countless individual creatures into one singular, consuming will. And when the fury finally subsides, when the guns fall silent, when no one remains alive to tell the tale, the biomass pours into the reclamation pools, is pumped up the capillary towers onto the hive ships, and the cycle is ruthlessly closed. There are no heroes, there are no monuments, there is only biomass recorded onto the ledger, and the swarm moves on, If every physical form is merely a function, and every function is merely a note, can the galaxy ever find enough silence to halt this terrifying, endless symphony? Genestealer Cults, the whispered invasion. There are invasions that begin with the roar of plasma engines, with the blinding light of orbital defense lasers, and with the terrifying darkness that covers the sky. But there are also invasions that begin with a simple whisper, a quiet whisper in a dark mining shaft, in a derelict cargo port, or in the cramped apartments of a forgotten hive center where no one ever pays attention. This is not a swarm that drops from the heavens. This is a seed that was planted long ago, growing silently, rooting itself deep into the foundations of society, spreading across generations until the entire planet suddenly realizes that the enemy was not outside the gate, but has been inside all along. This is the way of the Genestealer Cults, the bio-hybrid faiths, the insidious social drills of the Tyranids, those who meticulously prepare the banqueting table before the Great Hunger even arrives. It all begins with a single creature, a pure strain Genestealer, a formidable Tyranid bioform, smaller than a warrior, faster than a lictor, possessing claws as sharp as surgical scalpels, and a single overriding instinct not to kill, but to infect. A Genestealer does not require a hive fleet. It can survive alone for centuries, lurking within the dark depths of space hulks, those derelict vessels that drift chaotically through the warp, waiting for some fool to step inside. When an exploratory team, a salvage crew, or a mining group dares to open the hatch of a space hulk, the Genestealer attacks. But it does not seek to kill. It requires one victim, a living victim, and it performs the act that Imperial scholars call the Genestealer's kiss. This is not a kiss in the romantic sense. It is a precise surgical strike with a small biological proboscis hidden within the Genestealer's mouth, which stabs into the victim's neck, injecting a potent dose of Tyranid gene material into the bloodstream. The victim does not die. They feel little pain. It is merely a small, quickly healing wound. But the transformation that has occurred is irreversible. The Tyranid gene has successfully insinuated itself into the victim's cells, into their DNA, into their ova and sperm. And when that victim returns home, back to their planet, their family, their city, they remain completely unaware that they are carrying something terrifying. Something that will change their lineage forever. When the victim bears a child, that child is no longer purely human. It is a Genestealer hybrid, half human, half Tyranid. The first generation hybrid is almost entirely Tyranid in appearance. 4 arms, blue-grey skin, elongated skull, and completely hairless. They cannot survive in open society. They must be hidden, but they can breed. Their offspring, the second generation, are less Tyranid in form. They still possess 4 arms, but their facial features begin to resemble human ones. The third generation are even more human-like. 2 arms, skin that is nearly normal, retaining only a few strange characteristics, oversized eyes, a slightly pointed head, and skin that emits a faint bioluminescence under certain light. And the 4th generation hybrid appears almost completely human. They can live openly in society, they can marry pure human partners, and they can bear children. And those children can be seemingly normal humans, they can be hybrids, or in rare, terrifying cases, they can be a new pure strain Genestealer, completing the parasitic cycle and beginning a new infection all over again. This is how the Genestealer cults spread, not through open violence, but through biology. By hiding in plain sight within the layers of society, by gradually turning the human bloodstream into the Tyranid bloodstream, generation by generation, until no one can possibly tell where the boundary lies. But this is not merely biology. This is also deep-seated faith, because the hybrids, regardless of their physical appearance, can all sense something that pure humans cannot, the brood mind. This is a narrow, specialized branch of the Hive Mind, a psychic connection that is weak but powerful enough to link all members of the cult together, and more importantly, to the Patriarch, the founding purest strain Genestealer that started the entire infection. The Patriarch is not simply a beast. It evolves. As the cult grows, as the number of hybrids increases, the Patriarch becomes smarter, larger, and more psychically potent. It transforms into a biological psyker, capable of transmitting its will through the brood mind, guiding the entire cult like a single, coordinated pack. Flanking the Patriarch are two other critical positions, which together form the Brood Coven, the leading triumvirate of the cult. The first is the Magus, a hybrid possessing powerful psychic abilities who acts as the voice of the cult within human society. The Magus is the preacher, the healer, the one who explains the cult's cryptic doctrine to new converts, and the one who makes the entire belief system seem utterly rational. When a poor, exploited worker, utterly forgotten by the vast Imperium, encounters a Magus and hears promises of a better future, of a more equitable world, of a family that will truly accept them, they listen intently. And once they listen, they are already drawn in. The second key position is the Primus, the cult's military commander, who meticulously plans the day of ascension. The Primus is not a preacher. The Primus is a dedicated man of action. He trains the cultists how to handle firearms, how to set up ambushes, and how to destroy crucial infrastructure. He plots the strategy to ensure that when the time comes, the entire planet collapses in a matter of hours. These three positions, the Patriarch, the Magus, and the Primus, form the Brood Coven, and through the Brood Mind, they coordinate the entire cult as a single body. Every single cultist, no matter where they are or what they are doing, feels the will of the Brood Coven as a gentle whisper in their mind. There is no coercion, there is no pain. There is only a profound sense of belonging, a deep-seated feeling that they are finally a part of something much greater than themselves. And that is why the cults do not need to compel followers. People join voluntarily, because in a harsh, ruthless universe like Warhammer 40K, that genuine sense of belonging is more valuable than gold. The cultists do not call themselves followers of the Tyranids. They refer to the incoming swarm as the Star Children. They worship the Patriarch as the four-armed Emperor, the savior who will lead them to paradise. They await the day of ascension, the day when the great family from the stars will arrive and liberate them from the oppression of the Imperium, from poverty, and from their desperate lives. They truly believe that when the Hive fleet arrives, they will be welcomed. They will be transformed into something greater. They will be ascended. They do not know the terrible truth. Or if some within the cult do know, they do not speak of it. Because the truth is this: when the Hive fleet arrives, it makes no distinction. The cult is merely biomass, an appetizer, a psychic lighthouse to guide the swarm, destined to be consumed alongside everything else on the planet. The day of ascension is not a day of liberation. It is the day of total dissolution in a collective stomach. But until that moment, until the Hive fleet actually arrives, the cult lives, propagates, and meticulously prepares. The cult's structure is not that of a military organization. It resembles a shadowy trade union, a complex social network insinuating itself into every crucial facet of human society. At the very top is the Brood Coven. But beneath them are hundreds, even thousands, of different roles, each designed to function within human society without arousing suspicion. The icon word, the standard bearer, is the living symbol of the cult, leading the ceremonies, holding aloft the banner bearing the patriarch's likeness to remind everyone of the faith. The Clamavus, the propagandist, is the voice of the cult, broadcasting communications, writing subversive leaflets, singing working-class songs, subtly transformed into cult hymns. The Nexos, the strategic planning officer, is the cult's quiet brain, the one who maps the electrical, water and transport systems, knowing precisely where to strike to bring the entire city to a standstill. The Biophagus, the cult's biologist, is the one who experiments with the genes, who heals the poor citizens by infecting them with the Tyranid gene, nurturing the hybrids to be stronger, faster, and better suited for battle. And then there are the assassins, the Sanctus and Kellamorph, hybrids trained to single-handedly eliminate key targets. They do not fight on the open battlefield. They fight in the shadows, a bullet from a rooftop, a knife in a crowded street, an explosion in a governor's office. More importantly, they become legends, heroic figures whispered about, drawn on walls and sung about in ballads, stirring courage in ordinary people to take up arms when the day of ascension finally arrives. On the labor level are the acolyte hybrids, the second and third generation hybrids, strong enough to fight, but still retaining a near-human appearance, working in factories, in mines, and in cargo ports, awaiting the command. Neophyte hybrids, the fourth generation, appear almost fully human, allowing them to live openly, join the local PDF regiments, enter local government, and join any organization without suspicion. And aberrants, the heavily mutated hybrids, their muscles unnaturally swollen and their strength superhuman, are the cult's raw muscle, the ones who smash doors, breach fortifications, and carry heavy weapons when the uprising begins. And they all possess weapons, not military-grade weaponry, but repurposed industrial tools, Goliath trucks and rock grinders, heavy mining vehicles modified into crude armored personnel carriers, Atalan jackals, rugged all-terrain motorbikes equipped with heavy stubbers, Ridger runners, fast patrol vehicles with light firepower. All are listed as legitimate production tools on paper, easily concealed in large workshops and storage depots until the moment they roll onto the streets bearing the cult's banner. And most critically, the cults often possess Brood Brothers, Blood Brother regiments inside the local PDF and the Imperial Astra Militarum. These are not hybrids. These are pure humans who have been convinced, who have embraced the doctrine, and who are ready to turn their guns on their comrades when the day comes. They bring the heavy artillery, the battle tanks, and the full Imperial ammunition reserves. And when the cult rises up, they do not need to capture the armories. They have been inside the armories all along. The cult's strategy is never open conflict. Their strategy is deep infiltration. For decades, even centuries, the cult operates like a perfectly normal social organization. They infiltrate essential infrastructure, mining, transport, power generation, and water supply. They establish trade unions, support one another, and improve the welfare of their members, often filling gaps that the overburdened Imperium ignores. They provide healing for the poor via the Magus and Biophagus, build schools for children where the doctrine is gently taught, and organize festivals, weddings, and funerals, all subtly tied to the cult's symbols. Gradually, the cult ceases to be a strange, foreign organization. It becomes an integral part of society, a part that many citizens trust far more than their own government. And then one day, when the cult is sufficiently large, And when the broodmind senses the shadow in the warp approaching, the unmistakable sign that the Hive fleet has entered the system, the command is given, not in words, but as a feeling, a deep-seated sense that the time is now, and in a single night, the entire planet erupts. This is not a chaotic uprising. It is a perfectly coordinated general insurrection. Power stations are destroyed, communication lines are severed, senior officers are brutally assassinated. PDF strongholds are assaulted from the inside by brood brothers. Bridges are collapsed. Ammunition depots explode. And from the mines, from the slum blocks, and from the forgotten corners of the city, thousands, tens of thousands of cultists flood the streets with repurposed weapons, with banners, and with the fervent belief that they are liberating themselves. They do not know they are merely setting the table. They do not know that every defense they destroy, every piece of chaos they create, makes the arrival of the Tyranids tragically easier. And when the Hive fleet finally arrives, when the darkness covers the sky, and when the Hive ships appear in orbit, the cultists rejoice. They raise their arms to the heavens. They sing their hymns of praise. They welcome the family from the stars. They truly believe this is the day of ascension. But the swarm makes no distinction. Gargoyles descend, and they do not just attack Imperial soldiers, they attack everyone. Gaunts charge forward, and they do not hesitate before those who raise their hands in welcome. They tear them apart like any other biomass. Rippers crawl over the bodies of cultist and foe alike without discrimination, because to the Hive Mind, there are no allies. There is only biomass. And the cult, despite its faithful service, its careful preparation, and its immense sacrifice, is nothing more than biomass. Some cultists realize the truth. In those final seconds, as the gaunt lunges, as they see death reflected in the soulless alien eyes of the creature they called the Star Children, a few realize the horrifying magnitude of their betrayal. But it is far too late. Too late to run, too late to repent, too late to do anything but die. And when the dust settles, when the reclamation pools are established, when the biomass of the planet, including the biomass of the cult, is pumped onto the Hive ships, there is nothing left to remember. No monuments for those who believed. No praise for those who sacrificed everything. Only a dead planet and a Hive fleet that is slightly heavier, already moving toward its next target. But before all is finished, within the dying heart of the cult, a biological miracle has occurred. A new generation of children has been spawned. New, purer strain Genestealers, birthed from the fourth-generation hybrids, closing the parasitic loop. And a few of them, a very small few, do not remain on the planet. They hide aboard the outbound space hulks, on unsuspecting trade vessels, stowing away in dark, forgotten corners. And when those vessels arrive at another planet, a world that has never heard of the Tyranids, that knows nothing of the creeping threat, they disembark. One creature, one kiss, one victim, and the terrifying cycle begins anew. From a whisper in a dark alley, a planet-sized feast has been prepared. From one single seed lost in the dark, a forest of destruction has grown. And the Imperium, with all its power, with all its armies, cannot prevent this. For how do you fight an enemy that has been in the human bloodstream long before you ever knew war had been declared? If the drill has bored deep from within the very fabric of society, is any planet truly safe? Or are all worlds merely meals awaiting preparation? The mystery of the hunger. There are enemies that the human mind can readily comprehend. The forces of chaos, though a profound perversion of the soul, are still intrinsically tied to emotion, to desire, and to experiences that every human being shares: ambition, anger, despair, and ultimately a form of twisted hope. The orcs embody primal violence, yet they possess a fierce joy, an internal competitiveness, and a vibrant, crude culture that informs how they fight. The Eldar are arrogant and distant, yet they remain a sophisticated civilization with a rich history, complex art forms, and a deep-seated sorrow with which one can, in some small way, empathize. Even the Necrons, the metallic undead, possess the spectral remnants of a dynasty that once lived, once dreamed, and once held a true soul before becoming the tireless machines they are now. But the Tyranids fit none of these established frames. They have no history to tell, they produce no art to admire, they possess no emotions with which to empathize. They harbor no ambition that can be negotiated. There is only an ancient, quiet will, patient as the turning of the tides, rushing without haste, feeling no anger, and showing absolutely no pity. It is simply eternally hungry. And that perpetual hunger, when humanity struggled to name it, became known as the Great Devourer. Yet that name, poetic though it may sound, is still only a desperate attempt by human beings to assign moral meaning to a phenomenon that is inherently amoral. The Tyranids are not evil, they are not cruel, they do not harbor malice, they are merely hungry. And that hunger is not a sin, it is purely function. When the scholars of the Imperium, the Magos Biologists, and the Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos began to study the Tyranids, they searched relentlessly for a motive. They demanded to know, why do they do this? Are they enacting vengeance upon someone? Are they fleeing from some greater external threat? Are they searching for a specific goal? Perhaps a holy world, a source of power, or a god to worship. But the deeper their investigations went, the more chillingly apparent it became that there was no motive at all. There was no why, only how. The Tyranids consume because they are hungry. They are hungry because they are alive. And they are alive because their biology is precisely designed to be so. That is the entirety of their existence. There is no deeper layer. There is no hidden philosophical secret. There is only a biological cycle honed over millions, perhaps billions of years, operating with absolute cold efficiency. This singular focus is precisely why all diplomatic overtures with the Tyranids have always failed. Not because they refuse to negotiate, but because they cannot possibly comprehend the concept of negotiation itself. You cannot negotiate with a hurricane. You cannot strike a bargain with an earthquake. You cannot promise a flood that if it simply stops, you will offer it something else in return. For those phenomena do not want anything, they simply are. And the Tyranids, though immensely more complex than a hurricane, also simply are. They are a conscious biological phenomenon. But that consciousness is not tied to the concepts humanity calls purpose, meaning, or value. They hold only one singular, unyielding command, encoded into every strand of their DNA. Consume, learn, evolve, repeat. Yet, this is not a blind instinct. That is what makes the Tyranids more terrifying than any natural disaster. They learn. The Hive Mind, the Gestalt consciousness that directs the entire species, is not a simple machine running a fixed program. It is the very intellect of instinct, a biological mind forged from the countless individual minds of the Tyranid organisms, the minds of the prey they have consumed, and perhaps some grim theories suggest the minds of the very galaxies they have devoured before arriving here. The Hive Mind does not think as humans do. It possesses no language, it has no abstract mathematics, but it observes, it experiments, it adjusts, Every single time a Hive fleet attacks a planet, it is not merely an invasion, it is also a massive, multifaceted experiment. The Hive Mind tests different tactics, different bioforms, and different approaches. If a tactic proves effective, it is ruthlessly repeated. If it fails, it is immediately discarded. Every battle, won or lost, generates data. And that data is fed directly into the Norn-Queens, meticulously analysed and instantly recombined into new, perfected designs. A space marine fires a laser at a gaunt. The Hive Mind records the data. Laser rounds at this range are effective. The next generation of gaunt will possess light-reflecting armor. A flamer incinerates a pack of hormogaunts. The Hive Mind records the data. Fire is a distinct threat. The next generation of hormogaunt will secrete fire-retardant skin. An ambush tactic successfully breaks the swarm's rhythm. The Hive Mind records the data. More synapse creatures are needed, and they must be more dispersed. The next generation's synapse network will be thicker and far harder to sever. That is why there can be no complete victory against the Tyranids. Every time humanity wins, they are simultaneously teaching them. Every effective weapon, every successful tactic, all become crucial lessons. And the Hive Mind does not forget. It simply adjusts. This is not intelligence in the human sense. There is no philosophy, no art, no pure science. It is a terrifyingly different form of intelligence. The intelligence of accelerated evolution, of directed natural selection, of a colossal body that continuously restructures itself to be optimally efficient for the sole task of survival and expansion. And in this relentless process, the Tyranids do not merely consume physical matter, they also consume hope. That is the devastating, crippling effect of the shadow in the warp. The psychic darkness that causes so many worlds to feel as though the God Emperor himself has utterly abandoned them in their final hour. Imagine yourself as an ecclesiarchy priest on a distant world. Every day you pray to the Master of Mankind. You can feel his light, distant and faint, yet always present, like a small candle in the boundless darkness. It is your only solace in a brutal universe. And then one day, that light goes out. Not slowly, instantly. As if a massive, heavy door has been violently slammed shut. You attempt to pray, but the words fail to resonate. You try to reach the Emperor, but there is no reply. There is only an immense void, a cold, vast emptiness, shapeless but possessing crushing weight, as if something colossal has settled upon the warp, pressing down upon every single soul, transforming all hope into absolute silence. This is the shadow in the warp. It is not an active attack. It is simply the inescapable consequence of the Hive Mind's overwhelming presence, an intellect too large, too potent, and too massive for the warp to contain without severe distortion. The Hive ships act as massive psychic amplifiers, projecting this pressure stronger and farther, creating a zone of immense psychic compression that spans many light years. Within that zone, astropaths cannot transmit a message. Navigators cannot chart their course. Psychers encounter immense difficulty when attempting to use their powers, and many die simply from the effort of trying. It is a psychic blanket that utterly chokes out hope before the biological knife descends. And the most terrifying implication? The shadow in the warp is not magic. It is merely the side effect of a colossal intellect intruding upon the warp, like a massive iron sphere placed upon a silk sheet, causing the fabric to deform. The Hive Mind is not actively trying to silence the warp. It is simply too large for the warp to function normally around it. And that chilling fact means this: there is no way to halt the shadow in the warp, without halting the hive mind itself. And no one knows how to halt the hive mind. But the hunger does not stop at flesh and bone. There are documented terrifying cases where the Tyranids have adapted to consume even the essence of the spiritual realm. The most chilling evidence is the doom of Melantai, a specialized zoanthrope bioform discovered after a catastrophe on the Eldar craft world of Melantai. Melantai was an immense artificial world where millions of Eldar souls lived in fragile balance within the Infinity Circuit, the psychic network containing the souls of their ancestors. When the Tyranids attacked, the Eldar fought valiantly, but during the battle, a single Tyranid organism, later named the Doom of Melantai, emerged. It did not attack with claw or tooth. It simply drained. It siphoned psychic energy. It consumed souls. It tore a hole in the warp and pulled all surrounding life energy into itself, drawing in the souls of the dying, the psychers fighting, and the very Infinity Circuit itself. Millions of Eldar souls, both living and ancestral, were sucked into that creature, vanishing as water down a drain. When the carnage was finished, Melantai was left a spiritual corpse. Not only were the living slain, but the souls of the long dead were irrevocably consumed. This provided terrifying proof that the Tyranid hunger knows no limits. It does not stop at physical matter. If energy exists to be consumed, whether physical, chemical, or psychic, the hive mind will find a way to harvest it. It knows no concept of the sacred. It holds no respect for the soul. To the hive mind, a soul is merely another form of energy, and energy can be consumed. When investigators look at all this, at the planets stripped bare, the oceans and atmosphere sucked away, the capillary towers drilling deep into the crust, many call the Tyranids demons. They claim this is punishment from the God Emperor for humanity's sins. But the colder investigators, the Magos who believe only in data, see something entirely different. They see a perfectly closed loop of biological logistics. They see a system that wastes not 1 gram of biomass and leaves not a single cell redundant. They see a biological machine operating with near-perfect efficiency, adhering strictly to the laws of thermodynamics. Energy in, energy out, no loss, only conversion. They realize that the Tyranids are not demons. They are closer to the laws of nature. They are biological entropy, the transition of order into chaos, which is then reorganized into a terrifying new order in a cycle that can never end. This is why human morality finds no purchase when negotiating with the Tyranids. Humanity lives by values: honor, loyalty, sacrifice, faith. But these values are only meaningful in a world where individuals possess ego, choice, and the capacity for meaning. The hive mind possesses no ego. It makes no choices. It simply is. You cannot convince a force that has no capacity to be convinced. You cannot shame it, fear it, or make it regret its actions. You can only fight it, and the only effective way to fight is to switch to the language of cold facts, not emotion. The only effective counter-strategies against the Tyranids are not based on bravery or faith, though both are necessary to maintain morale. They are based entirely on reverse biological optimization. They require reducing the psychic signal, avoiding the invitation of the hive mind by limiting large psychic activity and strong energy signals. They require severing the synapse, destroying the synapse creatures to throw the swarm into disarray. They require attacking the consumption logistics, destroying the capillary towers, the reclamation pools, and the hive ships wherever possible. These are tactics that are neither glorious nor traditionally heroic, but they are effective. for they speak the only language the hive mind understands, the language of biological efficiency, of cost versus benefit, of pure, unbiased data. And in all of this, there is one final truth that humanity finds deeply unsettling. The Tyranids do not define win and lose in the way humanity defines them. A hive fleet defeated on one planet, having lost millions of organisms and forced to retreat, can still classify the interaction as a victory, provided it collected sufficient biomass and genetic data to redesign the swarm to be stronger for the next campaign. To the hive mind, every interaction simplifies down to two variables: biomass gained and useful genetic data learned. If both are positive, it is a win. If one is positive, it is still acceptable. Only when both are negative, when no biomass is harvested and no lessons are learned, does the hive mind classify it as a true defeat. And even then, it does not grieve, nor does it grow angry. It merely records the outcome and tries a different method. And that is the mystery of the hunger. It is not malice. It is not evil. It is merely apathy. The profound, cold apathy of a universe where life consumes itself in order to endlessly perpetuate its own existence. It is the chilling inevitability of a biological cycle with no beginning and no end, only the eternal loop of consumption and growth. The doomed worlds call them demons. The priests call them divine punishment. But the investigators only see the numbers. And amidst it all, humanity learns a new word to describe the cold indifference of the cosmos: inevitability. Because if the Tyranids cannot be persuaded and cannot be stopped, but only delayed, the question is no longer how do we win, but how do we survive long enough to find a way to win? And that is a question to which even the brightest minds of the Imperium still have no answer. If this hunger is not evil, but merely inevitable, does the universe still have room for compassion? Or is everything simply a desperate race not to be the last one consumed? The eternal hunger. There are maps that the Imperium of Mankind draws primarily to console itself. These are maps with clear, firm borders, with regions colored according to who rules them. Gold for the Imperium, blue for the Tau, red for Chaos, and grey for the Orcs. These are maps where everything appears to be in order, controllable, and ultimately comprehensible. But when the scholars attempt to map the Tyranids, they cannot use color. They can only use arrows. Long, thin, inexorable arrows pointing from the very edge of the galaxy toward the center. Behemoth from the northeast, Kraken from the east, Leviathan from below. And between these ominous arrows, they write chilling annotations such as estimated line of advance, zone of shadow in the warp, and world's lost contact. And when they look upon that finished map, when they see 3 massive arrows and dozens of smaller ones, all advancing, never halting, never retreating, they grasp one cold, inescapable truth. The stellar map has no actual borders. There are only places that the hunger has not yet reached. The hive fleets, Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, and countless other names that the Imperium applies to what it cannot comprehend, are not separate, distinct entities. They are but nervous branches. The probing tendrils of a colossal cephalopod, larger than anyone can possibly imagine. Each fleet is a stream of biomass moving in one direction, testing a single tactic and collecting crucial data. But all of them connect back to one source, a single main body, a terrifying central brain that is likely still situated beyond the galactic rim, within the intergalactic void, where light takes millions of years to cross and no human telescope can possibly peer. The Magos biologists have painstakingly attempted to estimate the total force. They take data from the known fleets, including the number of hive ships, the estimated biomass, and the speed of advance, and extrapolate backwards. If these three massive fleets are only the initial branches, how truly large must the main body be? And the result of these calculations has caused some of them to simply stop calculating. Because if the models hold true, the total biological mass of the Tyranids may be greater than the total existing biomass currently within the galaxy itself. This implies that even if the Imperium, Chaos, the Orcs, the Eldar, and the Tau all banded together somehow managed to defeat these three current fleets, there is still infinitely more on the way. And today's impossible victory is merely tomorrow's cruel delay. That is why the notion of total eradication of the Tyranids is a deadly illusion. You cannot utterly destroy a force when the vast majority of it you have never even seen. You cannot truly declare victory when the enemy has only sent its feelers. And even if you manage to sever a feeler, as was the case when Behemoth was broken at Macragge, that severed part has successfully transmitted its data back to the central mind. Data on what worked, what failed, which weapons were dangerous, and which tactics must be avoided. And the next time, when Kraken arrived, it did not repeat Behemoth's errors. It learned. It adapted. It was fundamentally stronger. The way the Tyranids consume, the way they transform a living planet into raw biomass, is a terrifying cosmological marvel. This is not warfare in the traditional human sense. It is a cosmic meal, a living thermodynamic cycle optimized over millions of years of evolution that wastes not a single joule of energy. It begins with the reclamation pools, the enormous digestive vats where all surface biomass is funneled. Human corpses, Tyranid corpses, trees, animals, bacteria, and organic soil. Biological acid dissolves everything, turning it into a single uniform green nutrient soup, rich in proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, minerals, and most critically, genetic material. From these pools, the nutrient is pumped up the capillary towers, the biological spires that are hundreds of meters tall, sunk deep into the planetary crust, like colossal feeding tubes. And from the apex of these towers, the biomass stream is sprayed directly into orbit, into the waiting bellies of the hive ships, where the Norn-Queens await to analyze, recombine, and birth the next generation. But the Tyranids do not stop at the surface. When all terrestrial biomass has been collected, they proceed to the assimilation phase. The hive ships descend closer to the surface, opening colossal biological mouths as wide as canyons, and begin to suck. They suck the ocean's billions of tons of seawater rising in massive, spiraling columns, vanishing into the bellies of the living vessels. They suck the atmosphere, the air gradually thinning, then vanishing completely. The temperature plummets, the pressure drops, and whatever remaining life survives suffocates within minutes. From a purely physical perspective, this is a process of local entropy reduction. A living planet, with its complex biosphere, its diverse ecosystems, and its high biological order, is converted into a uniform, low-entropy biomass mass inside the hive ships. The order of the planet decreases, but the total entropy of the universe increases because energy is released during the digestion process, and the Tyranids use that energy to sustain and expand themselves. This is a living thermodynamic machine, a biological mechanism that adheres strictly to the laws of physics, violating nothing, simply operating at a devastating level of efficiency. And when the hive fleet departs, the planet is no longer a planet. It is merely a dead stone, with no water, no air, no biomass, nothing but a barren crust scraped clean of all organic life. A cosmic corpse. drifting silently through space, without a name, without meaning, just a grey dot on a map, should anyone still bother to mark it. But the terrifying truth of the Tyranids consuming a planet is not how they eat, but why no one can call for rescue. That is the crippling effect of the shadow in the warp, the dense psychic blanket that envelops every Hive fleet, transforming the galaxy into a sea that has been violently drained, leaving only the empty shells of civilizations behind. The Imperium, and most other species, rely fundamentally on the warp. They rely on it for communication. Astropaths transmit messages across the warp, connecting worlds separated by hundreds of light years. They rely on it for travel. Navigators guide vessels through the warp, allowing ships to traverse distances otherwise impossible at conventional speeds. They rely on it for combat. Psykers use the warp's energy to generate devastating psychic phenomena. All logistics, all relief efforts, all Imperial navigation, all rely on one single factor: the ability to touch the warp, and the shadow in the warp severs that connection. Like a hand violently turning off the tap, suddenly, completely, and without negotiation. When the shadow falls, astropaths cannot send a signal. Navigators cannot find their bearings. Psykers encounter extreme difficulty when attempting to use their powers, and many die simply from the effort of trying. A planet under the shadow in the warp is like a city that has simultaneously lost power, water, and communications. Every single system collapses at once, and no one knows what is happening anywhere else. It is impossible to call for reinforcements, impossible to warn neighboring worlds, impossible to pray to the Emperor and feel any form of reciprocation. There is only silence, and in that silence, the Tyranids arrive. That is why the Tyranids do not need to win every battle. They only need to cut the scream when a planet falls silent. When no distress signal is emitted, the Imperium assumes all is well until it is far too late. And when they finally dispatch an exploratory team to check, months, perhaps years later, they find only a dead world and questions that have no answers. The shadow in the warp proves that the network of warp reliance, what the Imperium views as its greatest strength and the foundation of its empire, is also its single greatest systemic weakness. A weakness that the Tyranids, either accidentally or by cold design, exploit with devastating precision. And when scholars stand before all this accumulated data, when they look at the dead planets, at the shadow in the warp, at the Hive fleets relentlessly advancing, they are faced with two distinct hypothetical horizons, two possible futures, and no one knows which will come to pass. The cosmological pessimism horizon suggests this: if the current branches, Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan, are only a small fraction of the total Tyranid force, if the majority is still silently traversing the intergalactic void, slow but inexorable, then this galaxy may only be in its prelude. The Great War has not yet truly begun. All sacrifice so far is ultimately meaningless, and the final outcome, barring a true miracle or some unknown external intervention, is a surface scattered with dead rock and ash, a dead galaxy, without light, without sound, only empty planets drifting in the dark, and a Hive fleet that is heavier than before, continuing its journey toward the next galaxy. That is the inevitable end point of entropy, of a universe where life consumes itself until there is nothing left to consume. The historical pragmatism horizon suggests this. There is another viewpoint, one that is less grandiose, but perhaps more practical. The Imperium and other species survived Behemoth. They survived Kraken. They are currently surviving Leviathan. Not by achieving total annihilation, but by buying precious time. Every successful battle, however small, however costly, buys another day, another week, another generation to better prepare. Every time the synapse is severed, every time a capillary tower is destroyed, every time a hive ship is obliterated, these are small, painful wounds on a colossal body, but they are sufficient to slow it down. And if sufficient time is gained, if enough data is collected, and if enough interspecies cooperation, a rare commodity in the universe of Warhammer 40K can be forged, then possibly, just possibly, a solution will be found. Not to win utterly, but to survive long enough for the hunger to exhaust itself, or to be diverted, or to find another, easier target. Victory is not defined as destroying the Tyranids. Victory is defined as still having someone left to tell the story tomorrow. And between those two horizons, between cosmological despair and practical hope, there is one profound truth that both must accept. The Tyranids are not an enemy, they are a law. A fundamental law of the universe where life expands, consumes, and evolves without ceasing. They are biological entropy. They are the laws of thermodynamics made manifest in living form. They are undeniable proof that in the cosmological scale of Warhammer 40K, questions of morality often have no place to stand upon the surface of an endless hunger. Humanity dreams of victory, of the day the Tyranids are repelled, of the galaxy being liberated, of the moment the Imperium can finally breathe easy. But the Hive Mind does not dream, it calculates. It calculates biomass gained, it calculates useful genetic data, it calculates cost versus benefit, and every calculation, every decision made by an intellect that possesses no emotion but absolute cold logic, pushes the swarm closer to its single goal, to continue to exist, to continue to expand, to continue to eat. And the open ending remains history's most honest answer. No one knows when the final chewing will sound. No one knows whether this galaxy will die in silence, or whether there will be a miracle, a new weapon, a sudden alliance, an unforeseen cosmic event powerful enough to change the game. No one knows whether the Tyranids will ever stop, or whether they will continue until there is nothing left to consume. We only know one thing. The star maps are being redrawn every single day. And every day there is one more arrow, one more shadow zone, one more silent planet. And those who remain, those who still fight, can only hope that they are fast enough, strong enough, and lucky enough to purchase one more day. If an intellect can silence the entire warp upon its approach and consume all living matter without leaving a single cell behind, then what does victory truly mean beyond having someone left to tell the story tomorrow? And with that, we have traversed a long journey, from the silent day of an unnamed world, through the darkness in the warp past, the extragalactic origin, through the faceless hive mind, past the Norn-Queens hidden deep within the hive ships, right up to the innumerable forms of the hunger. The Tyranids, the Great Devourer, are not an enemy that can be defeated by a single battle, nor are they a threat that can be negotiated through diplomacy. They are merely a cosmic instinct performing its only function, to eat, to learn, and to grow. And in the grim-dark galaxy of Warhammer 40K, that is perhaps the most terrifying destiny of all, an enemy that holds no malice, only hunger. Thank you for staying with the Arcane Narratives through these reflective hours. If you feel there are any points in the lore that are inaccurate, or if you have any thoughts or questions you would like to share about the Tyranids, or about what we have explored together, please leave a comment below. The channel is always listening and learning from the community. And now, I have one question for you. In this first part, we covered the nature, origin, and biology of the Tyranids. But what about the battles, the great wars, the worlds that have fallen, the heroes that were sacrificed, the massive tyrannic campaigns that the Imperium has been forced to endure? Would you like a second part, where we recount those battles? From Macrage to Baal, from Octarius to the frontiers that are still burning today. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments section. If there is sufficient interest, we will continue the journey, moving from theory to the bloody history of those who stood before the Great Devourer and desperately fought to hold the line. Once again, thank you. Do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the subsequent stories from the grimdark galaxy. And now, rest. Sleep well, because in the darkness between the stars, there are things that never sleep, and they are still coming. I wish you deep sleep amidst the dreams of worlds that have not yet been consumed.